A gunshot cracks across open water. A woman plunges from a gangway suspended between two yachts, one belonging to her husband, the other to the man who wants him dead. Her blood trails through the Atlantic like a prayer nobody will answer. 48 hours earlier, she didn't even know her husband loved her. 72 hours before that, she signed away her freedom to erase a debt she never created. This is not a love story. This is a war story. And the woman drowning between two empires? She's the only weapon that matters. If you want to know how Selena Vale ended up bleeding in the ocean beside the most dangerous man alive, stay with me until the very end. Hit like. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the night it all started inside a tower made of glass and silence. The elevator climbed 46 floors without making a sound. Selena Vale pressed her back against the cold steel wall and watched the numbers tick upward like a countdown to something she couldn't name. Her reflection stared back from the polished doors, smudged mascara, bitten lips, a second-hand dress she'd bought for $11 at a thrift store on 9th Avenue because she couldn't afford anything else and didn't want to wear white. White was for brides. She wasn't a bride. She was a transaction. The doors opened into a foyer made of black marble and recessed lighting. No photographs on the walls. No shoes by the door. No evidence that anyone actually lived here. Just clean lines, cold surfaces, and the faint hum of a ventilation system that probably cost more than her father's entire house. Selena stepped out. Her heels clicked once, twice, then stopped. The penthouse stretched before her like a mausoleum. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan in all its electric arrogance. Bridges lit like veins, traffic pulsing 46 stories below, rain streaking down the glass in silver threads that made the city look like it was crying. Belladonna Tower. That's what they called this building. She'd looked it up on her phone in the back of the town car that brought her here. 62 floors, private elevators, a rooftop garden nobody ever used, owned entirely by Moretti Holdings International, which meant it was owned entirely by one man, her husband. The words sat in her mouth like something rotten. She'd signed the papers 3 hours ago in a law office that smelled like cedar and old money. No ceremony. No witnesses beyond 2 attorneys and a notary who wouldn't look her in the eye. Damian Moretti had arrived 11 minutes late, sat down without greeting her, signed every page with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and left before the ink was dry. He hadn't spoken a single word to her. Not one. And now she was standing in his penthouse. Their penthouse. Wearing a thrift store dress with a marriage certificate folded inside her purse, and absolutely no idea what was supposed to happen next. She walked deeper into the space. The living room was vast. Sunken floor, low-profile furniture in charcoal and slate, a fireplace that ran on gas behind a sheet of tempered glass. A bar cart sat near the window, stocked with bottles she couldn't pronounce. Beyond the living room, a hallway disappeared into darkness. Bedrooms, she assumed, plural, because this was not a home built for intimacy. This was a display case, a monument to control. Selena set her purse on the kitchen counter, white quartz, not a single crumb or water ring, and opened the refrigerator. Sparkling water, exactly 4 bottles of it, nothing else. She closed the door and laughed. It came out dry and bitter, more like a cough, and it echoed through the empty penthouse in a way that made her feel very small and very alone. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, hoping for her sister, dreading her father's doctor. It was neither. A text from an unknown number. The east bedroom is yours. Don't enter the west wing. A car will take you wherever you need tomorrow. D. That was it. Not welcome home. Not we should talk. Just territory lines drawn by a man who treated his new wife like a tenant. Selena read the message twice, then set her phone face down on the counter. She pressed both palms flat against the cold quartz and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way her mother used to tell her when the panic came, before the cancer took her mother's voice, then her mother's body, then everything else. She didn't cry. She was done crying. She'd cried when the hospital bills broke 6 figures. She'd cried when her father's insurance was denied for the 3rd time. She'd cried when Marco DeLuca, a man she'd trusted, told her there was one way, and only one way, to make the debt disappear. Marry Damian Moretti. Give him the legitimate public image his empire needed. In return, every dollar owed would be erased. Her father's treatment would be paid in full. and her sister could finish college without working 3 jobs. So she did it. She married a stranger who reportedly controlled half the shipping ports on the eastern seaboard and had connections to organizations that made federal prosecutors lose sleep. A man whose name appeared in tabloids beside words like ruthless and untouchable and alleged. A man she had met exactly once before the signing, at a charity gala where he'd looked at her across a crowded room with eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He'd said nothing to her that night either, but he'd watched her. She remembered that. She remembered the weight of his gaze following her through the crowd like something physical pressing against the back of her neck until she turned around and caught him staring from across the ballroom. He hadn't looked away. Most men did. Damien Moretti just held her gaze with an expression she couldn't decode, somewhere between curiosity and hunger and something colder than both. That was 5 weeks ago. Now she was his wife. Selena found the east bedroom. It was enormous, tastefully minimal, with a king-sized bed dressed in dove-gray linens and a window that looked out over the East River. A walk-in closet stood open and empty, waiting to be filled with a life she didn't have yet. An ensuite bathroom featured a rain shower, a soaking tub, and a mirror that lit up when she stepped in front of it. She took off the $11 dress, hung it in the empty closet where it looked absurd and lonely, pulled on the oversized t-shirt she'd packed in her duffel bag, the only luggage she'd brought, and sat on the edge of the bed. Rain hammered against the glass. She listened to it for a long time. Somewhere in this penthouse, in the West Wing she was forbidden to enter, Damien Moretti existed in a world she wasn't allowed to see. And somewhere in a hospital bed in Queens, her father slept with tubes in his arms and machines counting his heartbeats, alive only because his youngest daughter had sold herself to keep him breathing. Selena pulled the covers over her legs and stared at the ceiling. She didn't sleep that night. Not a single minute. 3 weeks passed like water through a cracked glass, slow enough to notice, fast enough to feel wasted. Selena learned the architecture of her captivity. The penthouse had 7 rooms she was allowed to enter and at least 3 she wasn't. Damien had a study behind a door that required a fingerprint scan. He had a second office on the 44th floor that she'd never seen. And the West Wing bedroom, his bedroom, remained sealed like a vault. She saw him maybe 4 times in those 3 weeks. Each encounter lasted less than 5 minutes. He'd appear in the kitchen at odd hours, 6 in the morning, midnight, 2 a.m., dressed in suits that fit like they'd been stitched onto his body, smelling like espresso and something darker she couldn't place. Sandalwood, maybe. Or smoke. He'd pour himself a drink, check his phone, and acknowledge her presence with nothing more than a nod or a glance that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Once she'd been sitting at the kitchen island eating cereal, the only food she'd managed to stock in the refrigerator since everything else felt presumptuous. And he'd walked in, stopped, and stared at her like he'd forgotten she existed. His jaw tightened. Something flickered behind his eyes. Then he turned around and left without a word. She'd sat there with the spoon halfway to her mouth, milk dripping onto the counter, heart hammering for reasons she refused to examine. Damien Moretti was not what she expected. The tabloids painted him as a shark in a suit, all power lunches and predatory smiles. But the man who haunted this penthouse was quieter than that, colder. He moved through rooms like he was calculating the weight of every object in them, including her. His silence wasn't passive, it was architectural. He'd built it deliberately, brick by brick, and she could feel the effort behind it, the way you could feel heat radiating off an engine even after it had been shut off. He was keeping his distance, and it was costing him something. She noticed it in the small things. The way his knuckles whitened when he gripped his glass in her presence. The way his eyes tracked her movement across a room even when his face remained perfectly neutral. The way he'd pause in doorways just for a beat before committing to entering a space she occupied, as though he needed a moment to steel himself. Selena wasn't naive. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where you learned to read people fast or you got hurt. She knew the difference between indifference and restraint. Damien Moretti wasn't ignoring her. He was holding himself back. From what? She didn't know yet. And that uncertainty kept her awake more than the silence ever did. On the 17th day, she broke one of his rules. She didn't plan it. The study door was open, actually open, the fingerprint lock disengaged, and she was walking past on her way to the kitchen. She saw the edge of a desk, papers, a glass of something amber. and she stopped. She should have kept walking. Every rational cell in her body told her to keep walking. But 17 days of silence and solitude and uncertainty had worn her down to something raw and reckless. And before she could stop herself, she stepped inside. The study was smaller than she expected. Dark wood, leather chair, a desk covered in documents she couldn't read. Some in English, some in Italian, most covered in numbers and codes that meant nothing to her. A bank of monitors on the far wall displayed security footage. The lobby, the elevator, the parking garage, the hallway outside her bedroom. She froze. Her bedroom hallway. He had cameras pointed at her bedroom hallway. Selena's stomach dropped. She looked closer. The footage was live. She could see the empty corridor, the closed door to her room, the faint glow of her bedside lamp leaking under the gap. He was watching her. Not inside her room. There were no cameras there, she checked later, but outside it. Monitoring her movements, tracking when she left, when she returned, how long she spent in different parts of the penthouse. She should have been furious. And she was. A hot spike of anger that rose through her chest and lodged in her throat. But underneath it, tangled up in the fury like a vine choking a fence, was something else. He was watching her the way you watch something you're afraid to lose. "You're not supposed to be in here." His voice came from behind her, low, flat, controlled, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Selena turned. Damien stood in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, tie loosened. She'd never seen him less than perfectly assembled, and the slight disorder of his appearance was jarring, like seeing a crack in a marble statue. His dark hair was pushed back from his forehead. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "Your door was open," she said. "That doesn't make it an invitation." 17 days. The words came out before she could filter them. 17 days in this place, and you've spoken maybe 30 words to me. I don't know what you eat. I don't know when you sleep. I don't know if you're ever actually here or if you just haunt this place like some kind of careful. Or what? She stepped toward him, stupid, reckless. But 17 days of silence had stripped away the fear that brought her here and left only frustration and something that felt dangerously close to loneliness. "You'll void the contract? Send me back to the debt collectors? You can't ignore me forever, Damien. I live here, supposedly, though I'm starting to think I'm just furniture you haven't gotten around to returning." Something shifted in his face. A fracture. Brief, quickly sealed, but she caught it. The way you catch lightning through a window before the thunder hits. Pain, real, unguarded pain. It was there and gone in half a second, replaced by the cold mask he wore like armor. "You're not furniture," he said quietly. "Then what am I?" He didn't answer. His eyes moved over her face, not the predatory scan of the charity gala, but something slower, searching, like he was memorizing her features against his will. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered there for a single, unbearable second, then snapped back to her eyes with the force of a man yanking his hand off a hot stove. "Go back to your room, Selena." "No." The word hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. She watched his jaw work, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, watched the tendons in his forearms tighten beneath the rolled fabric of his shirt. He was fighting something, something big, and he was losing. "I am asking you," he said, each word measured and precise, "to leave this room. And I am telling you," she said, matching his tone, "that I will not spend one more night in this tower being treated like a ghost in my own home. If this marriage is just paper, fine. But I deserve to know the terms. I deserve a conversation. You deserve better than this." It came out raw, scraped, like he dragged the words up from somewhere deep and bleeding. His composure cracked completely for a moment, just a moment, and she saw the man underneath, exhausted, furious, not at her, at himself, at something she couldn't see but could feel radiating off him like heat from a wound. Then the wall came back up, faster this time, harder. "The door stays locked from now on," he said. Don't come in here again." He walked past her close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body and smell the espresso and sandalwood and something electric that made her breath hitch. His shoulder almost brushed hers. Almost. He corrected at the last second, angling away like contact with her skin might be dangerous. He left the room. The fingerprint lock engaged behind him with a soft click. Selena stood alone in his study, surrounded by monitors that tracked her every move, and realized two things simultaneously. First, Damian Moretti was afraid of her. And second, whatever he was protecting her from, it wasn't the outside world. It was himself. 4 days after the study incident, she came home from visiting her father at the hospital to find a suitcase on her bed. Black leather, monogrammed with her initials. Initials she hadn't changed yet because changing your name felt permanent in a way that signing a contract didn't. Beside the suitcase was a note in handwriting she'd never seen before. Sharp, angular, almost aggressive in its precision. Pack for 5 days, warm weather. We leave at midnight. D. No explanation, no please, no context. Just an order from a man who apparently communicated exclusively through terse notes and loaded silences. Selena picked up the note and flipped it over, half expecting instructions on the back. Nothing. She looked at the suitcase, looked at the note, looked at the suitcase again. Then she pulled out her phone and called her sister. "He wants me to go somewhere," Selena said, keeping her voice low even though the penthouse was empty. Old habit. In their neighborhood, walls were thin and secrets were currency. "Go where?" Mara's voice was sharp, suspicious. Mara had been against the marriage from the start, had screamed at Selena in the hospital parking lot, called her a martyr, said she'd rather drown in debt than watch her sister sell herself to a man who probably had bodies buried in his backyard. He didn't say. Of course he didn't. "Selena, I know." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you married a stranger who won't talk to you, moved into a penthouse with security cameras and no food, and now he's telling you to pack a bag for an undisclosed location. This isn't a marriage, this is a hostage situation with better furniture." Selena closed her eyes. Mara wasn't wrong. But Mara also wasn't the one who'd sat across from the collection agencies. Mara wasn't the one who'd watched their father's face turn gray when the insurance company sent the final denial. Mara wasn't the one who'd done the math at 3 in the morning and realized that the only number that could save their family had exactly the right amount of zeros attached to Damian Moretti's name. "Dad's treatment is working," Selena said quietly. "His counts are improving. The doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said. I was there. That doesn't mean you have to—" "Yes, it does." Selena's voice hardened. Not at Mara. At the situation. At the grotesque arithmetic of survival that had turned her into someone who could weigh her own freedom against her father's life and choose without hesitation. "It does mean I have to, and I'm going. Whatever this is, wherever he's taking me, I'm going, because the alternative is going back to the version of our lives where Dad doesn't make it to Christmas. And I won't do that. I can't." Silence on the line. Long, heavy, full of things Mara wanted to say, but wouldn't. "Call me every day," Mara said finally. "I mean it. Every single day. And if you miss one call, I'm contacting the FBI, the police, and every journalist who's ever written the name Moretti. I don't care. I'll call. Promise me." "I promise." Selena hung up, stared at the suitcase, started packing. At 11:58, the elevator doors opened and Damian walked out, looking like he'd been built specifically to ruin women's lives. Black coat over a black turtleneck, dark trousers, shoes that cost more than her car. His hair was slightly damp, from rain or a shower, she couldn't tell, and pushed back to reveal the sharp architecture of his face. High cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had been designed for cruelty but occasionally, accidentally, fell into something softer. He glanced at the suitcase in her hand, then at her. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a microscopic relaxation, as though he'd been bracing for the possibility that she'd refuse. "You packed light," he said. "You didn't give me much to go on." The ghost of something, not a smile, but the distant cousin of one, crossed his face and disappeared. He took the suitcase from her hand, their fingers touched. Brief, accidental, electric. He pulled away first. Cars downstairs. They rode the elevator in silence, stood 3 feet apart the entire way down. Selena stared at the doors. Damian stared at his phone. Neither acknowledged the static charge that filled the small space between them like something alive. The car took them to a private marina she didn't know existed, a gated dock at the end of a road that wasn't on any map she'd ever seen. Rain was still falling, lighter now, and the air smelled of salt and diesel and something dark and oceanic. And there, moored at the end of the dock like a weapon dressed in luxury, was the yacht. Selina stopped walking. She'd seen boats before. Her uncle had owned a fishing boat in Jersey that smelled like bait and gasoline and never started on the first try. She'd been on the Staten Island ferry more times than she could count. She understood, in theory, that wealthy people owned yachts. But this wasn't a yacht. This was a statement, a declaration, a floating monument to the kind of money that didn't just buy things, but bent the world around itself like gravity. Obsidian. The name was painted on the hull in matte black against darker black, barely visible, like even the vessel itself preferred to remain in the shadows. It stretched at least 200 feet, all sharp lines and dark glass, with multiple decks rising above the waterline like a modernist building that had decided to escape into the sea. Lights glowed softly from within, giving the impression of restrained warmth behind cold walls. It reminded her of the penthouse. It reminded her of him. "We'll be aboard for 2 days," Damien said, standing beside her. Rain dotted his shoulders. He didn't seem to notice. Then we reached the island. What island? He looked at her. That look, the one that pinned her in place and made her forget how to be strategic. "You'll see when we get there." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He wasn't lying. She could see it. The tension around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. Whatever was happening, wherever they were going, he was carrying information he couldn't share yet, or wouldn't. The distinction felt important, but she couldn't figure out why. They boarded. A crew materialized and vanished, efficient, silent, dressed in black like the boat itself. A steward showed Selina to a cabin that was larger than her old apartment, with a queen bed bolted elegantly to the floor, a writing desk, and a porthole that revealed nothing but darkness and rain. "Mr. Moretti's quarters are on the upper deck," the steward said. "You'll find him in the main salon if you need anything." "And if I need to leave?" The steward blinked. "Ma'am?" "If I change my mind. If I want to go back." A pause. Careful. Practiced. "The tender can return you to shore at any time." Mr. Moretti was very specific about that. Selina studied the steward's face. He was good, trained not to show surprise, but she caught the faintest wrinkle of confusion, as though no one had ever asked that question before, as though the idea that someone aboard Damien Moretti's yacht might want to leave was genuinely novel. "Thank you," she said. She sat on the bed, felt the engines rumble to life beneath her, felt the dock fall away and the open water take hold, rocking the vessel gently as it pushed out toward the black Atlantic. She was on a yacht, in the middle of the night, heading to an unnamed island, with a husband who couldn't look at her without clenching his fists and couldn't stay away from her long enough to stop watching her on cameras. Selina Vale had spent 26 years being practical, being careful, being the responsible one who sacrificed and planned and never, ever jumped without knowing where she'd land. But tonight, somewhere between the dock and the open ocean, she felt the last thread of her old life snap. And instead of panic, she felt something terrifying and unfamiliar. Freedom. The kind that comes not from having choices, but from having already made the one choice that changes everything. She lay back on the bed and listened to the ocean beneath her. The yacht moved through the storm like a knife through dark water. And somewhere on the deck above, Damien Moretti stood alone in the rain, gripping the railing with both hands, watching the city lights disappear behind them, and trying, with everything he had, to convince himself that bringing her on this voyage wasn't the most selfish thing he'd ever done. He failed. He knew he would. Because the truth he hadn't told her yet, the truth that made his hands shake and his chest burn and his carefully constructed empire of control crumble like wet paper, was simple and devastating and irreversible. He hadn't married Selina Vale to save her family. He'd married her because 9 months ago, at a fundraiser he'd attended only as cover for a meeting that would redirect $14 million through Caribbean shell companies, he'd looked across a room full of people who feared him and seen one woman who didn't. A woman in a borrowed dress with tired eyes and a stubborn jaw and hands that trembled slightly around her champagne glass. Not from fear, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying weight no one else can see. He'd watched her all night, tracked her through the crowd without speaking to her, learned her name before the evening ended, had a full dossier on her life within 48 hours, the sick father, the medical debt, the sister in community college. the 2 jobs, the apartment in Queens with the broken radiator and the lock that didn't work properly. He'd read every page, then read them again. And then he'd done something Damien Moretti had never done in his entire life. He'd become obsessed, not with acquiring her. He could have done that easily, thrown money at the debt, arranged an accidental meeting, played the charming benefactor. He'd watched men like him do it 1,000 times. Buy vulnerability, purchase gratitude, manufacture dependency, and call it love. No. His obsession was darker than that, quieter. He'd become fixated on the architecture of her survival, the way she held her world together with nothing but willpower and sacrifice, and a refusal to break that bordered on supernatural. He'd watched through proxies and reports as she worked double shifts, negotiated with collection agencies, sat beside her father's hospital bed, reading aloud from books she was too tired to focus on. He'd watched her get knocked down by systems designed to crush people exactly like her, and he'd watched her stand back up every single time with a look on her face that made something ancient and broken inside him recognize something ancient and broken inside her. He didn't want to own her. He wanted to stand near her fire and see if it could thaw the frost that had settled over his life so long ago he'd forgotten warmth existed. But Damien Moretti didn't know how to want things without destroying them. That was the central failing of his character, the flaw that no amount of money or power or strategic brilliance could fix. Everything he touched turned to empire. Everything he desired turned to asset. The machinery of his mind couldn't process affection without converting it into leverage. And he knew, with this grim certainty of a man who'd studied his own darkness for decades, that if he let Selena Vale close enough to matter, his instinct would be to cage her, control her, turn her into one more piece of a machine that kept him safe. So he'd engineered the marriage at arm's length, used DeLuca as an intermediary, made the contract cold and clinical, and deliberately devoid of anything personal, kept his distance in the penthouse, communicated through notes and locked doors and the sterile language of business because the alternative, speaking to her directly, standing in the same room with her, breathing the same air, broke his concentration in ways that endangered everything he'd built. 17 days, 30 words. And every single night he'd stood in his study watching the security feed of her hallway, hating himself for needing to know she was safe, while simultaneously knowing that the biggest threat to her safety was him. Now she was on his yacht, sleeping in a cabin below his feet. And the distance he'd so carefully maintained was about to collapse entirely because the trip to the island wasn't optional. Nikolai Sorin had made his first move, and Damien needed Selena close enough to protect, even if it meant getting close enough to destroy. The rain intensified. The yacht cut deeper into the Atlantic, and above and below, 2 people who didn't understand each other yet lay awake in separate darknesses, feeling the same storm, thinking about the same silence, and wondering what would happen when the distance between them finally ran out. She found him in the main salon at dawn. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the sky bruised and swollen with clouds that hadn't decided whether to clear or collapse. The ocean stretched in every direction, gray-green and restless, with whitecaps that caught the early light like scattered glass. Damien sat at a table near the window with a laptop open, an espresso untouched, and a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking Italian, rapid, clipped, with an edge that made the language sound less like music and more like a series of precisely placed cuts. She didn't speak Italian, but she didn't need to. The tension in his voice was universal. He saw her. His words stopped mid-sentence. He said something short and final into the phone and ended the call. "Coffee's on the counter," he said. Selena poured herself a cup. Black, because the creamer looked too expensive to waste, and also because she'd learned to drink it black during nursing school when there wasn't time for anything else. She sat across from him at the table. The yacht rocked gently. The espresso machine hissed in the galley below. "You speak Italian," she said. "My father was from Naples." "Was?" "A beat. He died when I was 17. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a terrible man." He said it without emotion. A fact, like stating the temperature. "But he taught me the language, so I suppose something useful came out of it." Selena sipped her coffee, watched him over the rim. He'd changed from last night. A simple gray shirt, sleeves pushed up, no jacket. Without the armor of his suits, he looked younger, more human. She could see a scar on his left forearm, thin, white, deliberate, and what looked like the edge of a tattoo disappearing beneath his sleeve. "Tell me where we're going," she said. "An island, Caribbean. I own it." "You own an island." "I own several. This one is private, off the grid, no commercial access." "Why?" He closed the laptop, folded his hands on the table, looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be businesslike, but kept slipping into something more complicated. "Something is happening," he said. "Something I can't discuss in the city. The island is secure. You'll be safe there." Safe from what? From the consequences of being married to me. The words hung in the salt air between them. Selena set down her coffee. "Damien, I need you to talk to me like I'm a person, not like I'm a package you're relocating." His jaw tightened, that familiar tick, the muscle jumping beneath the skin like a second pulse. She was learning his tells, cataloging them the way she'd once cataloged vital signs during clinical rotations. Involuntary markers of something happening beneath the surface. "There are people who want to hurt me," he said slowly. "Powerful people. And the most effective way to hurt me right now is through you." "Through me? We barely know each other. Our marriage is a contract." Something crossed his face. A shadow, quick, like a bird passing over water. "That's what I need them to believe," he said. Before she could respond, he stood, picked up his phone, paused at the edge of the table, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his body, even in the cool salon air. "I know this isn't what you signed up for," he said. His voice was lower now, rough at the edges. "And I know I've given you no reason to trust me. But I need you to trust me anyway, for the next 5 days. Can you do that?" She looked up at him. This man who watched her through cameras and communicated through locked doors and fought his own impulses with a discipline that bordered on violent. This man who'd just admitted in his clipped and guarded way that she was in danger because of him. 5 days, she said. He nodded once. Then he walked out of the salon and up the stairs to the bridge, and Selena sat alone with her black coffee and the vast, indifferent ocean, and the unmistakable sensation that whatever wall Damien Moretti had built between them was about to come down. Not gently, not on his terms, and not in any way either of them was ready for. That evening, as the yacht cut south through waters that grew warmer and darker with every nautical mile, she found a door she hadn't noticed before, a narrow passage behind the main salon that led to a lower deck she hadn't explored. She pushed through it, expecting a storage room or a crew quarters. Instead, she found a room lined with photographs, dozens of them, framed, mounted, covering every wall from floor to ceiling in a space no larger than a closet. And every single photograph was of the same thing, her, Selena at the charity gala, Selena leaving her apartment building with grocery bags, Selena sitting beside her father's hospital bed, reading, Selena on the subway, eyes closed, head tilted back against the window, Selena walking through rain on 9th Avenue, jacket pulled tight, face turned away from the wind. Months of photographs. Seasons. Different clothes, different weather, the same woman captured again and again by someone who had been watching her long before she ever knew his name. Her hands shook, her vision narrowed to a point, and behind her from the doorway, Damien's voice came low and destroyed. "You weren't supposed to find that room." She turned to face him. He stood in the narrow passage, filling the frame, and for the first time since she'd known him, the mask was completely gone. No coldness, no control, just a man standing in the wreckage of a secret he'd never intended to share, looking at her with eyes that held everything he'd spent 3 weeks trying to hide. Terror, longing, and something so close to anguish that it stopped the air in her lungs. "How long?" she whispered. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. 9 months. The yacht rocked. The photographs stared from the walls. And between the woman who'd married a stranger to save her family and the man who'd been watching her from the shadows long before she signed his contract, something fundamental shifted, a tectonic plate of truth grinding against the fiction they'd both been living inside. Selena opened her mouth to speak, and that's when the ship's alarm began to scream. The alarm cut through the yacht like a scalpel through skin, a high, pulsing shriek that vibrated in Selena's teeth and turned the narrow photograph room into a strobe-lit coffin. Red emergency lights kicked on along the baseboards, painting the walls in intervals of blood and shadow, and every image of her face that hung in that room seemed to blink in and out of existence like a nightmare she couldn't fully wake from. Damien moved first. He grabbed her arm, not gently, not roughly, but with the mechanical precision of a man who'd been trained to react before thinking, and pulled her out of the passage and into the main salon. His grip was iron. His face had already transformed from the vulnerable, exposed man she'd seen seconds ago back into something harder, something operational. "Stay behind me," he said. "What's happening?" He didn't answer. He was already at the intercom panel on the salon wall, pressing a button that connected to the bridge. The alarm continued screaming overhead. Through the windows, the ocean was black and featureless, and the yacht's running lights carved pale arcs across the water that revealed nothing but empty waves. A voice crackled through the intercom. Male. Calm in a way that suggested professional training rather than actual calm. "Sir, we have a vessel on radar, 4 nautical miles, approaching fast from the southeast. No transponder, no response to hails. Speed? 32 knots and accelerating." Damien's jaw locked. His hand was still on Selena's arm. She could feel the tendons in his fingers tighten incrementally, like a guitar string being tuned past its limit. "Kill the exterior lights," he said into the intercom. "Change heading to 270 full speed and get Enzo up here." "Already en route, sir." Damien released her arm, turned to face her. The red emergency light caught the scar on his forearm and made it look fresh. "Go to your cabin," he said. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone who isn't me or a man named Enzo. He's 6'2", shaved head, tattoo on his neck. You'll know him. Tell me what's going on." Selena Ossati. "No." She planted her feet. The yacht was picking up speed beneath them, the engines deepening from a hum to a roar, and she had to widen her stance to keep her balance. "You don't get to drag me onto a boat in the middle of the ocean, show me a room full of photographs you took of me for 9 months, and then tell me to go hide in my cabin. That's not how this works. Not anymore." Something cracked behind his eyes. Not anger. Frustration, maybe. Or the specific agony of a man who knows the truth will cause more damage than the lie, but can't hold the lie together anymore. "Someone is following us," he said. "I don't know who yet, but I can think of exactly one person who would track this yacht. And if I'm right, then every second you spend standing in this room instead of behind a locked door is a second I can't afford to lose." "Who?" His name is Nikolai Sorin. The name meant nothing to her. But the way Damien said it, like pronouncing the name of a disease he'd been fighting for years, told her everything she needed to know about the weight it carried. "He's the reason we're going to the island," she said. Not a question. He's the reason for a lot of things. Damien stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell him. Espresso, sandalwood, and underneath it something metallic, like adrenaline had a scent. "Please go to your cabin. I am asking you, not ordering, asking." The word "please" in his mouth sounded foreign, borrowed, like he'd learned it from watching other people and had never found a reason to use it until now. Selena held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the stairs. She made it 4 steps before she stopped and looked back. "The photographs?" she said. His face tightened. "We're not done talking about that." She descended the stairs, found her cabin, locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed with her hands between her knees and listened to the yacht accelerate into the dark Atlantic while the alarm finally cut to silence and left nothing but the roar of engines and the sound of her own breathing. Her phone had no signal. She'd checked it reflexively, muscle memory, the modern instinct to reach for connection when everything else falls apart. But the screen showed nothing. No bars. No Wi-Fi. No link to Mara or the hospital or anyone who existed in the world she'd left behind at the dock. She was alone on a dead dark yacht in the middle of the ocean with a man who'd been stalking her for 9 months and someone named Nikolai Sorin apparently chasing them through the night. Selena pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. She did not cry. She had promised herself she was done with that, but her hands were shaking and no amount of breathing could make them stop. 2 hours passed, maybe 3. Time on a ship in open water with no phone and no windows that showed anything but darkness became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made her feel untethered from the world. A knock at the door, 3 sharp raps. "It's Enzo." She opened it. The man in the doorway matched Damien's description exactly. 6'2", shaved head, a tattoo of a compass rose on the left side of his neck that climbed up behind his ear. He was thick through the shoulders, mid-40s maybe, with a face that looked like it had been broken and reassembled several times without any particular concern for symmetry. His eyes were brown and steady and completely devoid of pretense. "Ma'am, Mr. Moretti asked me to bring you to the upper salon. The situation's changed." "Changed how?" "The vessel turned off, broke contact about an hour ago, headed south-southeast at speed." He paused. "Could have been nothing. Commercial traffic sometimes runs dark through these corridors. But Mr. Moretti doesn't believe in coincidence, and neither do I." Selina followed him up 2 flights of narrow stairs to a section of the yacht she hadn't seen, an upper salon with a curved glass wall that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. Dawn was beginning to crack the horizon, turning the water from black to deep indigo, and the first pale light caught the edges of clouds stacked along the eastern sky like gray towers. Damien stood at the far end of the room with a phone in one hand and a glass of something amber in the other. He'd changed clothes at some point, a black Henley now, pushed up at the sleeves, and she noticed for the first time that the tattoo on his forearm wasn't just an edge. It was a serpent, coiled in a figure 8, eating its own tail. Beneath it, the thin white scar she'd seen earlier ran parallel to the ink like a footnote. He looked up when she entered. Enzo disappeared behind them without a word. "Sit down," Damien said. "I've been sitting for 3 hours." "Then stand. I don't care. But listen." She leaned against the glass wall, crossed her arms, waited. Damien set down the phone, took a long drink from the glass, set that down too. Then he looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize, the one he wore when he was about to tell her something true and hated himself for it. The vessel was Soren's, one of his reconnaissance boats, fast, lightly armed, designed to track without engaging. He wasn't trying to intercept us tonight. He was confirming our heading. Which means he knows where we're going. He knows I have an island. He doesn't know which one, not yet, but he's narrowing it down, and the fact that he had a boat waiting for us within 4 hours of departure means he has people inside my organization. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Selina watched the ripples cross Damien's face, not fear exactly, but the grim recalibration of a man who just realized his fortress had a crack in it. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "You and Soren." 7 years. 7 years of what? He picked up the glass again, swirled the liquid, put it back down without drinking, a stalling mechanism. She'd seen her father do the same thing with coffee mugs when he was trying to find words for something ugly. "Nikolai Soren runs the second largest private logistics network in the Western Hemisphere," Damien said. "Shipping, transport, warehousing. On paper, he's a businessman, clean, philanthropic, sits on boards, funds hospitals." He paused. "In reality, he moves things that don't appear on any manifest. Weapons, people, information, whatever pays. And for 7 years, he and I have existed in a state of détente, mutual boundaries, agreed territories, an understanding between 2 men who could destroy each other but chose not to because the cost was too high. What changed? You." The word fell between them like a blade. 8 months ago, Soren learned I was conducting surveillance on a civilian woman in New York. He didn't know why. He didn't know who you were. But the fact that Damien Moretti, a man who doesn't form attachments, who doesn't expose himself to emotional leverage, who has spent 2 decades making sure there is nothing on this earth that anyone could take from him, was suddenly obsessed with a woman in Queens. He stopped. His jaw worked. Soren recognized vulnerability. And Soren is the kind of man who doesn't waste an opportunity like that. "Boys!" "Ah, must say." Selina's stomach turned, not from the ocean, from the realization that was crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on glass. "You married me to protect me," she said slowly. "Not just for the contract, not just for the image. You married me because putting me inside your organization was the only way to keep me within reach of your security infrastructure." Damien didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the brightening horizon, and in the half-light his profile looked carved from something ancient and tired. A monument to a man who'd been fighting so long he'd forgotten what peace felt like. "I married you," he said quietly, "because I couldn't stop myself. The protection was the excuse I used to justify it. But the truth is uglier than that." He turned back to her. The truth is that I wanted you close. I wanted you where I could see you, where I could know you were safe. Not because it was strategic, because the alternative, you existing in the world without me between you and everything that could hurt you, made me feel like I was drowning. The confession sat in the air between them, raw and steaming, and Selena felt something inside her chest rearrange itself in a way that couldn't be undone. Not forgiveness. It was too early for that. Not trust. She didn't have enough information for trust, but recognition. The feeling of looking at another person and seeing, beneath the armor and the lies and the damage, something that matched a frequency inside yourself. That doesn't make it okay, she said. I know. The photographs, the surveillance, the contract. You engineered my life without my consent. I know. You treated me like a problem to be managed. Yes. And now I'm on a yacht with no phone signal heading toward an island I've never heard of because a man I've never met apparently wants to use me to destroy you. Yes. She stared at him. He held her gaze. Neither of them blinked. Is there anything else? She asked. Anything else you've done that I don't know about? Because if we're doing this, if I'm trusting you for the next 5 days or 5 minutes or however long I decide to stay, then I need everything, right now, all of it. Damien was silent for a long time. The yacht swayed. The horizon brightened. Somewhere below, the engines hummed their relentless rhythm. Your father's original doctor, he said finally, the one who was denied by insurance 3 times. Selena went very still. I had him replaced. The new physician, Dr. Ashwin, is the best oncologist on the Eastern Seaboard. He was already treating your father before we ever met. I arranged the transfer through the hospital's administrative board. Your father's improved prognosis isn't coincidence. It's because I put the right doctor in the room. The blood drained from her face. She felt it go, felt the heat leave her cheeks and her hands and pool somewhere in her gut like liquid lead. You changed his doctor. Yes. Without telling anyone. Yes. My father could have... Her voice cracked. She pressed her fist against her mouth, breathed through it. You played with his life. You made medical decisions for my family without our knowledge. What if the transfer had gone wrong? What if the new treatment didn't go wrong? That's not the point. The words tore out of her like something that had been caged too long. She was on her feet now, crossing the salon toward him, and she watched his body tense. Not in defense, but in acceptance, the way a man braces for a blow he knows he deserves. The point is, you decided. You reached into my family's life and moved the pieces around like we were on your chessboard. My father, my sister's tuition. Did you do that too? Silence. Damien, the scholarship Mara received from the Alcott Foundation. Oh my... The Alcott Foundation is a subsidiary of a holding company I control. Selena's legs felt hollow. She sat down hard on the nearest surface, a low credenza against the wall, and pressed both hands flat against it to stop the room from tilting. Everything. Every piece of relief her family had experienced in the past year. The doctor, the scholarship, the easing of pressure that had made the debt feel survivable enough to consider Damien's contract in the first place. All of it was him. He hadn't just offered her a lifeline. He'd spent months engineering the conditions that would make her say yes. You built a trap, she whispered. I built a bridge. To where? To this? She gestured at the yacht, the ocean, the vast and terrifying emptiness surrounding them. To a marriage I thought I chose but didn't? To a life where every good thing that's happened to my family was actually just you pulling strings? Your father is alive because of that doctor. My father is alive because he's strong and stubborn, and my mother raised him to fight. Don't you dare take credit for that. The words hit him. She saw it. The flinch he tried to hide, the slight backward shift of his weight, the way his hand found the edge of the table and gripped it. He looked for a moment like a man who'd been punched in the sternum and was trying to breathe through the impact. You're right, he said. His voice was hoarse. You're right about all of it. I manipulated your circumstances. I created conditions I could control because control is the only language I understand. And I told myself it was protection, that I was keeping your family safe, that I was giving you a better option than the one you had. But the truth is I was terrified that if I didn't engineer every variable, you'd never choose me, and I couldn't live with that. So you took the choice away. I took the risk away. I thought they were the same thing. They're not. I know that now. She looked at him across the salon. Morning light was pouring through the glass wall now, golden and merciless, and it illuminated every line on his face, the exhaustion carved under his eyes, the tension etched around his mouth, the faint tremor in the hand that gripped the table. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months, maybe years. She wanted to hate him. Part of her did. The part that had grown up watching her mother fight systems designed to exploit people exactly like them. That part recognized the machinery of Damien's manipulation with visceral clarity and recoiled from it. But another part, the part that had seen fear in his eyes when the alarm sounded, the part that had watched him struggle to say please like the word might cut his tongue, the part that understood what it meant to do terrible things for people you loved because the alternative was losing them. That part saw something else in Damien Moretti. Not a monster. A man who'd never been taught a language for love that didn't involve control. I can't forgive this right now, she said. I'm not asking you to. I can't trust you. I know. But I'm not getting off this boat. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the second time in 12 hours, the mask fell completely, and she saw behind it, not the billionaire, not the kingpin, not the strategist, just a man standing in the wreckage of every wall he'd ever built, watching the one person he couldn't afford to lose decide whether to stay. Why? He asked. And the question was so small, so genuinely bewildered that it almost broke her. Because whatever you are, you're the only person who's been honest with me in the last hour. And apparently that's my bar now. She stood up, walked past him toward the stairs, stopped at the door. I need to call my sister. Figure out how to get me a phone signal, satellite, whatever you have. I'll arrange it. And Damien, he turned, if I find one more room like that, one more secret you've been keeping, one more piece of my life you've rearranged without telling me, I will walk off this boat in the middle of the ocean. I don't care if I have to swim. Are we clear? Clear. She left. He stood alone in the golden light of the upper salon, gripping the edge of the table with both hands, and slowly, so slowly it was almost invisible, lowered his head until his forehead touched the glass surface. He stayed like that for a long time. Enzo found him 20 minutes later and said nothing about the posture. They'd known each other for 15 years. Enzo had seen him after negotiations that ended in gunfire, after betrayals that cost millions, after the night his father died in a Naples hospital and Damien had walked out into the rain and didn't come back for 3 days. He'd never seen him like this. The vessel's confirmed as Soren's, Enzo said quietly. Maritime intelligence flagged it as the Vesper, registered in Panama. We tracked it to a refueling station off the Turks and Caicos. He's positioning. Looks like it. If he knows we're heading Caribbean, he'll start covering the approach channels within 48 hours. We need to adjust the route, or we need to speed up. Speed up. I want to be on the island by tomorrow night. Done. There's one more thing. Damien raised his head. Enzo's face was carved from the same stone as always, but there was something in his eyes, a hesitation that didn't belong there. Marco De Luca didn't check in for his 11 o'clock, his phone's off, his apartment's empty, his car's still in the garage. The silence that followed was heavy enough to have its own gravity. Marco De Luca. The intermediary. The man who'd brokered the marriage contract. The man who'd introduced Selena to the terms, explained the arrangement, and promised her that everything was straightforward. A business deal, nothing more. The man who knew every detail of the operation. And now he was gone. When? Damien asked. Sometime between last night and this morning. His security detail found the apartment at 6 a.m. Bed hadn't been slept in. No signs of forced entry. No note. He ran. Or he was taken. Same result. If Soren has him, he has the contract details, the financial structure, my connection to Selena's family. He'd have everything. Damien closed his eyes. When he opened them, the vulnerable man from 10 minutes ago was gone. In his place stood something older, colder, the version of Damien Moretti that had built an empire from the ruins of his father's violence and maintained it through 2 decades of strategic brutality that never appeared in any court filing or police report. Double the security detail on the island, he said. Pull the team from Antigua. I want motion sensors on every approach within 3 miles, land and sea. And find De Luca. alive if possible. If not, I need to know what he gave them before it's too late. And her? Damien looked at Enzo. The question sat between them like a loaded weapon. She stays with me, he said. From now until this is over, she doesn't leave my sight. She's not going to like that. No, she's not. Enzo left to make the calls. Damien stood alone in the salon, watching the morning sun turn the ocean to burnished copper, and thought about the woman 2 decks below him who'd just called him the most honest person she'd spoken to in an hour. She was wrong about that. He had one more secret, the biggest one. The one that made the photographs and the doctor and the scholarship look like parlor tricks by comparison. But he couldn't tell her yet. Not until they reached the island. Not until he understood the full scope of what Soren knew and how DeLuca's disappearance fit into the architecture of a war that was accelerating faster than he'd planned for. The yacht pushed south. The water turned from Atlantic gray to Caribbean blue. And somewhere in the bowels of the ship, Selena sat in her cabin with a satellite phone Enzo had delivered, listening to her sister's voice for the first time in 2 days and trying to explain a situation she didn't fully understand to a person who loved her too much to hear it clearly. He admitted it, Selena said. All of it. The doctor, your scholarship, the whole thing was engineered. Silence on the line. Then Mara's voice, quiet and dangerous. I'm going to kill him. Get in line. Selena, I'm serious. This isn't romance. This is pathology. A man who surveils you for 9 months, manipulates your family's medical care, fabricates a scholarship to control your sister's financial independence. That's not love. That's predation with a platinum credit card. I know what it is. Do you? Because you're still on the boat. Yes, I'm still on the boat. Because somewhere out there is a man named Nikolai Soren who apparently wants to kidnap me or kill me, and right now the safest place for me, and for Dad, and for you, is inside the security perimeter of the person whose resources are the only thing standing between our family and whatever's coming. So you're trapped. I'm making a choice. A choice you were engineered to make. That one landed. Selena closed her eyes and leaned her head against the cabin wall. The satellite phone was warm against her ear. She could hear the faint hiss of distance, the vast empty space between the middle of the ocean and her sister's apartment in Queens where the radiator still didn't work, and the lock was probably still broken. Maybe, she said. Maybe I was. But I'm here now, and the only thing I can control is what I do next. And what I do next is survive this. For Dad. For you. For me. And for him? I don't know yet. She hung up, set the phone on the bed, stared at the wall. Then she picked the phone back up and did something she'd been avoiding since she boarded this yacht. She opened the browser, satellite connection, painfully slow, and searched for Nikolai Soren. What she found made her blood go cold. Otten. The island appeared on the horizon at dusk on the second day, a dark shape rising from the water like the spine of something submerged. As they approached, details emerged. Dense jungle climbing steep volcanic slopes, a crescent of white sand beach backed by palm trees, and at the highest point, partially obscured by canopy, the angular geometry of a compound built from concrete and dark timber. No dock, no harbor. Just a floating platform connected to the shore by a narrow causeway. And on that platform, 4 men in tactical gear waiting with the patient stillness of people who were paid to stand in the heat and not complain about it. Selena stood on the upper deck and watched the island grow larger. The air had changed during the voyage, heavy now, tropical, saturated with moisture and the sweet rot of vegetation and something floral she couldn't identify. The ocean had shifted from gray to a blue so deep it looked almost black in the fading light, and the sky above the island was stacked with clouds that glowed amber and violet at the edges. Damien appeared beside her. He'd been on the bridge for most of the day, communicating with the island in clipped satellite calls she wasn't supposed to overhear, but did anyway through the thin walls of the yacht. She'd caught fragments, numbers that sounded like coordinates, names she didn't recognize. And once, a phrase in Italian spoken so viciously that even without translation, the meaning was clear. Someone had made a mistake, and Damien was not a man who tolerated mistakes. "Welcome to Carnelian," he said. "That's its name?" "That's what I call it." The yacht maneuvered alongside the floating platform with hydraulic precision. Lines were thrown, secured, and within minutes a gangway extended from the lower deck to the platform where the tactical team waited. One of them, the tallest, a woman with close-cropped hair and a rifle slung across her chest, stepped forward and exchanged words with Enzo that Selena couldn't hear. "The compound has 12 rooms," Damien said as they walked the gangway. "Full staff, kitchen, medical bay, communication center. The perimeter is monitored around the clock. You'll have access to everything except the security wing on the west side. Another west wing I can't enter." He almost smiled. Almost. It died before it reached his mouth, but she caught the twitch at the corner of his lip, the involuntary contraction of a man whose sense of humor had been buried under decades of self-discipline and was trying, against all odds, to claw its way back to the surface. "I'll show you the security wing tomorrow," he said. "You earned that." They walked the causeway to the beach. The sand was fine and white and still warm from the day's heat. The jungle began 20 yards from the waterline, thick, impenetrable, humming with insects and the occasional shriek of something avian hidden in the canopy. A gravel path cut through the vegetation and climbed steeply toward the compound, lit by low solar lamps that cast pools of amber light at regular intervals. Selena's legs burned by the time they reached the top. The compound was more sprawling than it had appeared from the water. A series of connected structures built into the hillside, all clean lines and dark materials with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the ocean on one side and dense jungle on the other. Solar panels covered the roof. A satellite array rose from a concrete pad near the tree line. And everywhere, on the paths, at the entrances, walking the perimeter, armed guards moved with the quiet efficiency of men and women who took their work seriously. Her room was on the second floor. Open, airy, with a balcony that faced the ocean, and a bed draped in white linen that looked absurdly inviting after 2 nights of yacht sleep. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The bathroom had an outdoor shower, actual outdoor, surrounded by smooth volcanic stone and open to the sky. She stood on the balcony and looked down. Below, the infinity pool glowed turquoise in the darkness, its edge merging optically with the ocean beyond. 2 guards patrolled the pool deck with flashlights that cut the dark like miniature lighthouses. Damien appeared in her doorway. He'd changed again. Linen pants, bare feet, a shirt he hadn't bothered to button past the sternum. In the soft light of the room, with the jungle sounds and the salt air and the exhaustion softening his features, he looked almost human. "DeLuca's been found," he said. Selena turned. "And?" "He's alive. He was in Santo Domingo. Checked into a hotel under a false name with 2 suitcases and a ticket to Buenos Aires booked for tomorrow morning. He ran, which means he's scared, and scared men are either useless or dangerous. My people are bringing him to the island now. He'll be here by morning." "What happens when he gets here?" Damien leaned against the doorframe. The posture was almost casual, but his eyes were anything but, sharp, calculating, running through scenarios faster than she could track. "I asked him what he told Soren and how long he's been talking. And if you don't like the answers, a beat. Then we have a bigger problem than I thought." He pushed off the doorframe, took a step into the room, then stopped himself. She watched the decision play out on his body, the forward momentum of a man who wanted to be closer, arrested by the rigid self-control of a man who'd promised himself he wouldn't. His hand rose to the doorframe and gripped it, knuckles whitening. "The outdoor shower works," he said. "Water comes from a natural spring. It's cold." "Good. I could use cold." His eyes met hers. In the dim light, they were almost black. The same bottomless dark she'd seen at the charity gala 9 months ago, the same gravity well gaze that had pinned her from across a crowded room and started all of this. But now there was something new in them, something that hadn't been there before the photographs, before the confessions, before she'd stood in his salon and told him she was staying, even though she couldn't forgive him. Hope. Thin and fragile and barely visible, like a candle flame behind frosted glass. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too." "I don't sleep much." "I know. I've heard you walking the halls at 3 a.m. The fragile hope flickered. "You heard that?" This from the man who had cameras on my hallway. Another twitch at the corner of his mouth, closer to a smile this time. Still didn't make it. He left. She stood on the balcony for another 10 minutes, listening to the jungle and the ocean and the sound of his bare feet descending the stairs, and then she stripped off her travel clothes and stepped into the outdoor shower. The water was cold. Shockingly, brutally cold. It hit her like a reset button, stripping away the accumulated tension of 2 days at sea and the emotional whiplash of a dozen revelations. And she stood under it until her teeth chattered and her skin prickled, and the only thing she could feel was the water and the stone beneath her feet and the hot, complicated weight of everything she now knew about the man who'd brought her here. He wasn't what she thought. He was worse and better and more damaged and more dangerous and more honest than anyone she'd ever met, in the specific way that people are honest when they've run out of lies and don't have the energy to build new ones. She turned off the water, wrapped herself in a towel, lay on the white bed. For the first time since boarding the yacht, she slept. And in the room below hers, the room he'd chosen specifically because it was beneath hers, close enough to hear if anything happened, close enough to reach her in seconds, Damian Moretti sat in the dark with his phone in his hand and stared at a message he'd received from an encrypted number 40 minutes ago. 4 words. No signature. I know about her. He read it 7 times. Then he deleted it. Then he sat in the darkness and planned a war. Pakpao. DeLuca arrived at dawn in a speedboat flanked by 2 of Damian's men. Selena was eating breakfast on the terrace, fresh fruit, toast, coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, when she heard the engines cut and the shouting begin. She walked to the railing and looked down at the dock. Marco De Luca was climbing the causeway between 2 guards, and even from 50 feet above, she could see he was a different man than the one who'd sat across from her in the law office 3 weeks ago. That Marco had been smooth, tailored suit, easy smile, capped teeth, the kind of groomed confidence that made you trust a man even when your gut told you not to. This Marco looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes for 2 days. Sweat stains at the collar, stubble that had passed through fashionable and arrived at desperate. His eyes kept darting to the tree line, left, right, left, like he expected something to come out of the jungle and finish whatever had already started to take him apart from the inside. Damian met him at the top of the path. He was dressed for the heat, white shirt, dark pants, bare feet still. But the casualness of his clothes couldn't disguise the violence of his posture. He stood with his weight forward, shoulders square, head slightly tilted, like a predator that had caught a scent and was deciding whether to strike or play. Marco. Damian, listen. Inside. I can explain. Inside. Now. DeLuca followed him into the compound. Selena finished her coffee, set the cup down, and followed them both. She found them in a room she hadn't seen before, ground floor, windowless, lit by a single overhead fixture that cast harsh white light and left the corners in shadow. DeLuca sat in a chair in the center of the room, not tied, not restrained, but positioned in a way that made the distinction irrelevant. Damian stood across from him, arms crossed, leaning against a concrete wall. Enzo was by the door. He saw Selena approaching and stepped forward to block her. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Let her in," Damian said from inside the room. His voice carried the flat, dead quality of a man who'd already decided the outcome of this conversation and was going through the motions out of courtesy. Selena entered. DeLuca's eyes found her immediately, and she watched something happen on his face, a complex, ugly cascade of emotions. Guilt, relief, and underneath both, a fear so pure it looked almost childlike. "Selena," he said, "I'm sorry. I need you to know that. Whatever happens, don't talk to her." Damian's voice cut the room like a blade on tile. "Talk to me. How long have you been communicating with Soren?" DeLuca's mouth opened, closed, opened again. 4 months. The silence that followed was surgical. Selena could hear DeLuca breathing, ragged, shallow, the breath of a man whose body was running on cortisol and regret. 4 months, Damian repeated. "You brokered my marriage in January. Soren approached you in February. A week after the signing, one of his people reached out, a woman. She didn't identify herself at first, just asked questions about the contract, general things. I thought she was a journalist. But she wasn't. No. And when you realized she wasn't, you kept talking." DeLuca's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs and stared at the floor. "They had photographs of me with someone, a situation I couldn't—it was blackmail." Yes. What did you give them? The contract terms, the financial structure, Selena's personal details, her family, her father's condition, the hospital, her sister's school. He looked up. His eyes were wet. I didn't give them the island. I didn't give them the yacht schedule. I swear on my... Don't swear. Just tell me what you gave them and I'll decide what it's worth, DeLuca told him. It took 20 minutes. Selena listened to every word, standing against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding her own body together, and felt the reality of her situation crystallize into something sharp enough to cut. Soren knew everything. Her father's hospital, her sister's school, the terms of the marriage, the financial pathways, the location of the penthouse. He knew that Damien had engineered the contract, and he knew why, not for business cover, but for the woman herself. He had the blueprint of Damien's obsession, which meant he had the blueprint of Damien's vulnerability. When DeLuca finished, Damien straightened from the wall, walked across the room, stood directly in front of the man who'd betrayed him and looked down with an expression that made Selena's skin go cold. It wasn't rage. Rage she could have understood. This was calculation. The precise, methodical assessment of a man deciding whether another man was still useful or had become a liability. You will stay on this island, Damien said. You will not contact anyone. You will not leave this room without escort. And when this is over, you and I will have a longer conversation about the cost of what you've done. Damien, get out of my sight. Enzo took DeLuca. The door closed, and Damien stood in the empty room, staring at the chair where his oldest associate had just dismantled the last illusion of safety and said nothing. Selena watched him, watched the stillness, watched the way his hands hung at his sides, not clenched, not open, but suspended in the specific posture of a man who didn't trust himself to move. He knows about my father, she said. The hospital, the room number, everything. Yes. And Mara, her school, her address. I have people on both of them already. Have since before we left New York. You knew this was coming. He turned to face her. In the harsh overhead light, with the shadows cutting his features into sharp plains and dark valleys, he looked 10 years older than the man who'd almost smiled on the causeway 12 hours ago. I knew it was possible, he said. I didn't know how much he had. Now I do. He paused. Selena, I need to go to Antigua tomorrow. There's a meeting I can't postpone. People I need to see face to shore up the perimeter around your family. I'll be gone 24 hours. Maybe less. And I stay here. With Enzo. With the full security team. With everything I can put between you and whatever's out there. She looked at the empty chair. The harsh light. The concrete walls. 24 hours, she said. 24 hours. He stepped toward the door, stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her temple. Close enough that if she turned her head, her lips would brush his jaw. When I come back, he said very quietly, I'll tell you the last thing. The one thing I haven't told you yet. The one I'm not going to like. The one that changes everything. He left the room. His footsteps echoed down the corridor and faded into the jungle sounds beyond the compound walls. Selena stood alone in the interrogation room, surrounded by concrete and silence, and the chemical smell of DeLuca's fear still hanging in the air, and understood with absolute bone-deep clarity that she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't come back from. Tomorrow, Damien would leave. Tomorrow, she would be alone on an island with armed guards and a traitor, and a jungle that hummed with things she couldn't see. And somewhere out there, across the warm Caribbean water, a man named Nikolai Soren was watching. Waiting. Moving pieces on a board she couldn't see toward a checkmate she couldn't prevent. The sun climbed over the jungle canopy. The guards changed shifts. The pool glowed turquoise and still. And beneath it all, beneath the beauty and the silence and the manufactured calm, Selena could feel it. The way you feel a storm before it arrives, the way the air changes pressure and the birds go quiet and the world holds its breath just before everything breaks. It was coming. And no wall, no guard, no island fortress in the middle of the Caribbean was going to stop it. That night, the last night before Damien left for Antigua, they sat together on the terrace overlooking the ocean and didn't speak for almost an hour. The silence was different now, not the cold architectural silence of the penthouse, but something warmer, exhausted. The silence of two people who had said too much and not enough and didn't know which words were left. Damien's hand rested on the table between them, open, palm up. An offering or a reflex or an accident, she couldn't tell. Selena looked at it for a long time. Then she placed her hand inside his. His fingers closed around hers. Not tight, not possessive, just closed, like a door shutting on everything that had come before and opening onto something that hadn't been named yet. Neither of them spoke. The ocean murmured below. The jungle hummed in the dark. And 12 miles to the east, running without lights through water the color of ink, 3 boats carrying 18 armed men changed course toward an island called Carnelian, and the woman they'd been sent to take. Selena woke to the sound of nothing, not silence. She'd learned the difference in 3 weeks of living inside Damien Moretti's world. Silence had texture. The penthouse silence was mechanical, humming with ventilation and the distant pulse of a city that never stopped. The yacht silence was liquid, underscored by the creak of hull against water and the deep throb of sleeping engines. Even the island had its own silence, layered with insect song and wind through canopy and the rhythmic crash of waves against volcanic rock. This was different. This was absence. The insects had stopped. The tree frogs that had screamed all night from the jungle perimeter had gone quiet. Even the ceiling fan above her bed seemed to turn slower, as though the air itself was holding its breath. She sat up. The sheets were damp with sweat. The tropical heat had settled into her room like a living thing overnight, and the ceiling fan couldn't compete. Through the balcony doors she could see the sky, pre-dawn gray, thick with clouds that had rolled in from the east and blanketed the stars. Her phone, the satellite phone Enzo had given her, showed 4:47 a.m. Damien had left for Antigua 6 hours ago. She'd watched the speedboat pull away from the floating platform at 11, watched his figure diminish against the dark water until the running lights became pinpricks and then vanished entirely. He'd looked back once. She'd been standing on the terrace, though she hadn't planned to be there, hadn't planned to watch him go. But her feet had carried her to the railing and her hands had gripped the metal, and she'd stood there until there was nothing left to see. Before he left, he'd come to her room. Stood in the doorway the way he always did, one hand on the frame, body angled half in, half out, as though full commitment to entering her space required a kind of surrender he was still calibrating. Enzo has the perimeter, he'd said. 16 people on rotation, motion sensors on every approach. The compound can lock down in 90 seconds. You said that already. I'm saying it again. She'd looked at him. In the soft lamplight, with the jungle humming behind him and the weight of everything unsaid pressing the air thin between them, he'd looked like a man walking toward something he wasn't sure he'd survive. Come back, she'd said. Simply, without drama. The way you'd say it to someone going to the store, except that the store was a criminal negotiation in Antigua, and the someone was a man who'd made enough enemies to fill a graveyard. His hand had tightened on the doorframe. The tendons jumped beneath his skin. His mouth opened, and for one suspended electric second, she'd thought he was going to cross the threshold. Step into the room. Close the distance that both of them had been maintaining with increasingly transparent excuses. He didn't. 24 hours, he'd said. And then he was gone. That was 6 hours ago. Now the insects were silent and the air was wrong, and something in the base of Selena's spine, that primitive pre-verbal alarm system that had kept her alive through 26 years in a neighborhood where you learned to read danger before it announced itself, was firing with a persistence she couldn't ignore. She got out of bed, pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, laced her sneakers because some instinct told her bare feet weren't appropriate for whatever was coming, picked up the satellite phone and walked to the balcony. Below, the pool glowed its eternal turquoise. 2 guards were visible on the deck, one near the far edge, one by the path that led down to the beach. They moved in their regular pattern, flashlights sweeping in practiced arcs. Then one of them stopped. The guard near the beach path, a stocky man she'd seen at meals, always polite, always armed, froze mid-stride. His flashlight beam went rigid, pointing into the jungle. His free hand moved to his earpiece. His body language changed in a way that Selena recognized from a lifetime of watching people respond to threats they couldn't see yet. Shoulders squaring, weight dropping into the balls of his feet, chin tucking toward his chest like a fighter preparing for impact. The second guard noticed. Crossed the pool deck at a run. They exchanged words Selena couldn't hear, both now facing the tree line with their weapons transitioning from patrol-ready to something more deliberate. Selena's phone buzzed. A text from Enzo. "Stay in your room. Lock the balcony. Do not come downstairs." She locked the balcony doors, stepped back from the glass. Her heart was running at a pace that made her vision pulse at the edges, and she forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her, the way she'd taught herself in every hospital waiting room and collection agency office and 3 a.m. panic attack that had defined the last 2 years of her life. The satellite phone buzzed again. Not Enzo this time. An unknown number. A single line of text. "Ask your husband about the Casablanca file." She stared at the screen. Read it 3 times. The words meant nothing to her. Casablanca could be anything, a place, a code name, a bluff. But the timing made her stomach clench. Someone knew she was here. Someone had this number. Footsteps in the hallway. Fast. Heavy. A knock. Not 3 crisp raps like Enzo's, but a palm slammed flat against the wood with the urgency of a man who didn't have time for politeness. "Mrs. Moretti, it's Enzo. Open the door." She opened it. Enzo stood in the corridor in full tactical gear, vest, sidearm, radio crackling on his shoulder. Behind him, 2 guards moved past, carrying equipment she couldn't identify in the dim light. "We have movement on the eastern perimeter," Enzo said. His voice was controlled, but the control was costing him. She could see the effort in his jaw, the way he spoke through clenched teeth as though loosening them might let something escape he couldn't afford to release. 3 vessels, small, fast, running dark. They breached the sensor line 4 minutes ago. Soren. "We don't know yet. Could be smugglers using the island chain for transit. Could be fishermen who drifted off course." "You don't believe that?" "No, ma'am, I don't." "What do we do?" "You come with me to the safe room. It's in the basement level, reinforced concrete, independent communications, supplies for 72 hours. Mr. Moretti built it for exactly this scenario." Selena grabbed the satellite phone, followed Enzo down the corridor, down 2 flights of stairs, through a section of the compound she hadn't explored. Industrial, unfinished, smelling of concrete dust and generator fuel. They passed through a steel door that required Enzo's handprint and a 6-digit code, then descended another half-flight into a room that looked like a bunker dressed up as a studio apartment. A bed. A desk with 3 monitors showing security feeds. A small kitchen area. No windows. The air was cold and recycled and carried the metallic taste of air that had been filtered too many times. "Stay here," Enzo said. "I'll be on comms." He pointed to a radio on the desk. "Channel 3. You hear anything that doesn't sound like my voice? You switch to Channel 7 and you call Mr. Moretti directly. The sat link in this room has independent power. Even if they cut the compound's electricity, you can still transmit." "Enzo." He paused at the door. "How many people do we have?" 16, plus me, plus the 4 from the dock team. 21 total. "And how many are coming?" He held her gaze for a beat too long. "We're figuring that out." He left. The steel door sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Selena stood alone in the bunker, surrounded by concrete and cold air and the green glow of security monitors, and watched the feeds. 3 screens. Top left showed the beach approach, empty, dark, waves catching the faint pre-dawn light. Top right showed the jungle perimeter along the eastern ridge. Still, silent, the motion sensor grid displaying a series of green dots that meant all clear. Bottom center showed the compound interior, hallways, the terrace, the pool deck, where the 2 guards were now joined by 4 more, all of them positioned along the eastern tree line with weapons shouldered. For 12 minutes, nothing happened. Selena sat at the desk, watched the screens, listened to the radio chatter on Channel 3, clipped military shorthand she couldn't fully decode but could feel the temperature of. Calm. Professional. The practiced cadence of people doing a job they'd trained for. Then, at 5:03 a.m., every green dot on the eastern perimeter turned red simultaneously. The radio exploded. "Contact east, multiple targets moving through the tree line. I've got 6, no, 8. They're splitting, flanking north. Gunshots, South Beach. South Beach under fire, sus." The monitors flickered. The beach camera caught muzzle flashes in the tree line, brief white bursts that turned the jungle into a strobe-lit nightmare. The pool deck camera showed guards dropping to covered positions behind concrete planters, returning fire toward the eastern ridge. The compound camera caught Enzo running through the main hallway, barking orders into his radio with a voice that had shed its professional calm and turned raw. Selena pressed her hands flat on the desk. Her knuckles were white. The satellite phone lay beside her, screen dark, and she had the sudden irrational urge to call Damien, to hear his voice, to have someone tell her this was going to be okay. But she didn't. Because he was in Antigua. Because he couldn't help from Antigua. And because the woman who'd survived 26 years in Queens by being practical and clear-headed and refusing to collapse when collapsing would be easier was not going to fall apart in a bunker while people fought and died above her. She picked up the radio. "Enzo, talk to me." Static. Gunfire. Then his voice, breathless. 18, at least 18. They're coming from 3 sides. East, south, and through the cliff path on the north end. They're well equipped. Night vision. Suppressed weapons. This is professional. Can you hold? A pause that lasted a lifetime. For now. How long is for now? I don't have an answer to that, ma'am. The South Beach camera went black, not static. Black. Someone had destroyed it. The pool deck camera showed 2 guards dragging a third toward the compound entrance, and even on the grainy feed she could see the dark stain spreading across the third man's tactical vest. Selena's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, released them, clenched again. The tremor wasn't fear, or wasn't only fear. It was the specific vibrating tension of a person who understood, with cold biological clarity, that people were being hurt because of her. Because of her. Because 9 months ago, a man she'd never met looked across a room and couldn't look away. And now 18 armed mercenaries were storming a Caribbean island to take her. Not because she had value, not because she possessed information or leverage or power, but because she was the thing that Damien Moretti cared about, in a world where caring about anything was a death sentence. The radio crackled. "Enzo to safe room. They've breached the south wall. Ground floor. I'm pulling the perimeter team back to the compound interior. Do not leave that room. Repeat, do not leave that room." Copy. She sat in the cold light of the monitors and watched the invasion unfold with the helpless clarity of a spectator watching a building burn from across the street. The compound camera showed guards falling back through corridors, taking positions at doorways and stairwells, exchanging fire with shadows that moved through the lower floors with coordinated precision. She counted muzzle flashes, tried to keep track of which guards were still moving and which had stopped, lost count. At 5:31 a.m., the lights in the compound went out. The monitor switched to infrared, green-tinged, ghostly, turning the familiar architecture of the building into a fever dream of heat signatures and empty corridors. She could see bodies on the ground floor, some moving, some not. She couldn't tell friend from enemy, couldn't distinguish Enzo from the attackers, couldn't do anything but sit in a concrete box and watch the war happen in shades of green. Her satellite phone rang. She grabbed it. "Damien?" Not quite. The voice was male, smooth, accented, Eastern European maybe, softened by years of Western polish. It carried the easy confidence of a man who was used to being in control of conversations and had never been given a reason to doubt that assumption. "My name is Nikolai Sorin," the voice said, "and I believe you're sitting in a very uncomfortable room right now." Selena's blood turned to ice water. She could feel it, the actual temperature change in her veins, the cold sweeping down from her chest to her fingers to her feet. "How did you get this number?" Marco DeLuca was very thorough in his record-keeping, a conscientious man in his way. "I have the frequency for your satellite phone, the access codes for the compound's secondary communications array, and the blueprint for the room you're currently hiding in. 3rd sublevel, northeast corner, steel door with a biometric lock that I understand requires Mr. Moretti's handprint or his head of securities. Is Enzo nearby? I imagine he's rather busy." She said nothing. Her jaw was locked so tight her molars ached. "I want you to know," Soren continued, "that I did not want this. Violence is expensive, and I am, at heart, an economist. I prefer negotiations, transactions, the civilized exchange of value between rational parties. But your husband made civilized exchange impossible when he decided to acquire you, and in doing so, exposed the only fault line in an otherwise impenetrable operation. What do you want?" "I want to talk. In person. Without the unfortunate intermediary of bullets and bleeding men. I have a yacht anchored 2 miles off your southern coast. A beautiful vessel, not as ostentatious as the Obsidian, but considerably more comfortable than a concrete bunker. I'd like you to come aboard, voluntarily, as my guest. Your guest. I understand the term rings hollow given the circumstances, but I assure you, you're attacking an island, killing people, and calling to invite me to tea. Does that work on most people? A pause, then a laugh, genuine, surprised, carrying a warmth that made her skin crawl precisely because it sounded real. No, he said. It doesn't. Most people are too frightened to be sarcastic at this point in the conversation. I think I understand what Damien sees in you. You don't know anything about what he sees in me. I know he sees vulnerability, sacrifice, a woman who would destroy herself to save the people she loves. Those are extraordinarily useful qualities in a partner, from a certain perspective, from Damien's perspective specifically. He collects people who will bleed for their loyalties. It's how he built his empire. The question is whether you're a partner or a possession, and I suspect even you don't know the answer yet. The words landed like stones in her stomach. Not because they were cruel, they were, but because they touched something she'd been thinking and hadn't said out loud. The uncomfortable, gnawing question that lived underneath every revelation, every confession, every moment of tentative connection she'd shared with Damien over the past 2 days. Was she choosing him? Or had she been engineered to choose him? Here is my offer, Soren said. Come to my yacht. Willingly. No one else gets hurt. I pull my people off the island. Your guards live. Enzo lives. DeLuca. Well, DeLuca's usefulness has rather expired, but I have no interest in him. All I want is a conversation with you, and the opportunity to show you something that I believe will change your understanding of the man you married. The Casablanca file. Silence. A real silence this time. Not the performative pause of a man controlling a conversation, but the genuine silence of someone recalculating. You've heard the name. Someone texted it to me 30 minutes ago. That wasn't me. Then who? Another pause. Shorter. It seems we both have more variables to account for than we realized. All the more reason to talk. The file is real. What it contains is, well, I'll let you see for yourself. But I promise you this. Once you've read it, you will understand exactly what Damien Moretti is. Not the version he's shown you, the wounded, conflicted man who can't control his feelings. The real version. The one he's been hiding from you since before you ever signed that contract. Selena looked at the monitors. The infrared feed showed fewer heat signatures moving through the compound. Whether that meant the battle was ending or the defenders were losing, she couldn't tell. If I say no, then my people continue what they've started. They reach the safe room eventually. The biometric lock is sophisticated, but everything mechanical can be defeated with enough time and the right tools. They bring you to me anyway, but by then, more people will have died and the tenor of our conversation will be considerably less pleasant. You're threatening me. I'm describing consequences. There's a difference, though I appreciate that the distinction offers little comfort when you're the one facing them. Selena closed her eyes, pressed the phone against her ear so hard the plastic dug into her cartilage. She could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire through the concrete walls, distant, irregular, the sounds of a fight that was winding down rather than escalating, which meant one side was winning. And from the tone of Soren's voice, relaxed, unhurried, conversational, she could guess which one. If I come, she said, voluntarily. You pull everyone out, nobody else gets hurt. You have my word. Your word means nothing to me. Then accept it for what it's worth and make the best decision you can with imperfect information. That's all any of us ever do. She opened her eyes, looked at the monitors one last time. On the compound feed, a heat signature she was almost certain was Enzo was pinned behind an overturned table in the main hallway, exchanging fire with 3 figures advancing from the south entrance. He was alone. The 2 guards who'd been with him were motionless on the floor. She picked up the radio. Enzo! His voice came back ragged, cut with static and the sharp punctuation of gunfire. Ma'am, stay in the room. How many do you have left? A beat. Longer than it should have been. 7. 7. Out of 21. 14 people down, dead, wounded, she didn't know, and the fight wasn't over. Enzo. If I leave the compound voluntarily, he says he'll pull his people out. Everyone stops fighting. Absolutely not. 7 people, Enzo, and more of them than you. Mr. Moretti gave explicit instructions. Damien's not here. Her voice cracked on his name. She pressed her fist against her mouth, breathed through it, continued. He's not here, and people are dying, and if I can stop it, he will never forgive me. He'll be alive to not forgive you. That's the point. Silence on the radio. Gunfire in the background. Then Enzo's voice, stripped of everything professional, everything controlled, reduced to the raw voice of a man who'd spent 15 years protecting someone and was now being asked to let that someone's most important thing walk into the hands of an enemy. The cliff path on the north side. It's the only approach they haven't fully covered. If you go out through the maintenance tunnel, there's an access hatch in the northeast corner of the safe room, under the floor paneling. It'll put you out at the base of the cliff. From there, it's a quarter-mile to the north beach. His boats will be watching. Enzo, don't thank me. And when he asks how this happened, you tell him I fought it. You tell him I said no. You tell him you overrode me. I will. Go now, before I change my mind. She put the radio down. Found the floor paneling in the northeast corner, a section that looked identical to the rest until she pressed the edge and felt it give, revealing a recessed handle that pulled up to expose a narrow metal ladder descending into darkness. The maintenance tunnel. An escape route built by a man who planned for every contingency except the one where the woman he loved decided to surrender herself to save the people protecting her. Selena climbed down. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and smelled of damp concrete and old air. Emergency lighting ran along the ceiling in thin strips that gave off a red glow barely sufficient to see by. She moved forward in a half-crouch, one hand on the wall, the other clutching the satellite phone. She didn't call Damien. She should have. She knew that. Every rational calculation said call him, tell him, let him react. But she also knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who'd watched him struggle for 3 weeks against the very impulse she was about to trigger, that if she called, he would do something catastrophic. Abandon the Antigua meeting, commandeer a boat, storm across open water into a situation he couldn't control, and get himself killed trying to reach her. And she couldn't carry that. Not on top of everything else. Not on top of the 14 people upstairs who were bleeding because a man loved her and another man knew it. The tunnel ended at a concrete wall with a metal wheel, like a submarine hatch. She turned it. The mechanism was stiff, salt air corrosion probably, in a tunnel that was meant for emergencies that never came, and her hands burned against the cold metal as she forced it open. Night air rushed in, warm, wet, carrying the smell of sea spray and jungle rot and something smoky, gunfire residue drifting from the compound above. She crawled out onto a rock shelf at the base of the cliff. Below her, the ocean churned against volcanic stone. Above, the compound was invisible behind the cliff face, but she could hear the fighting, muffled, diminishing, the last pockets of resistance being squeezed dry. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her sneakers were soaked from tunnel condensation and slipped on the wet rock. She steadied herself against the cliff face and looked north. The beach was maybe a quarter-mile away, a strip of pale sand visible in the pre-dawn gray, bordered by the jungle on one side and the ocean on the other. Between her and the beach, the cliff path wound along the rock face in a series of narrow switchbacks that looked, in the near darkness, like a scar on the side of the mountain. She started walking. The path was treacherous, loose gravel over slick stone, with drops on her left that fell 40 feet to churning water and walls on her right that oozed moisture and crumbled at the touch. She moved slowly, testing each step, her hands finding purchase on roots and outcroppings that her eyes couldn't fully resolve in the darkness. Halfway down, she stopped. Not because the path was blocked, not because she heard footsteps behind her, because her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. The Casablanca file is about you, Selena. Not about him. About you. She stared at the screen. Read the words 3 times. They didn't make sense, or they made too much sense, and her mind was rejecting the implications because accepting them would require rearranging everything she thought she understood about the last 9 months. A file about her. Not about Damien's operations. Not about his enemies or his empire or his criminal infrastructure. About her. What could possibly be in a file about Selena Vale? A nurse from Queens with medical debt and a sick father and nothing remotely interesting enough to warrant classification, encryption, or the attention of men who waged wars over information. Unless the file wasn't about who she was now, unless it was about who she was before. The thought arrived with a physical sensation, a pressure behind her sternum, like a hand pressing against her chest from the inside. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't have enough information to know. But the feeling was there, primal and insistent, and it told her that whatever was in that file was the thing Damien had promised to tell her when he came back from Antigua. The last secret. The one that changes everything. She kept walking. The path leveled out, the jungle thinned, the beach appeared, 20 yards of sand between cliff and water, with small waves lapping at the shore in a rhythm that felt obscenely peaceful given what was happening on the other side of the island. Two men waited at the waterline. Tactical gear. Weapons lowered but visible. Behind them, a rigid inflatable boat rocked in the shallows with its engine idling. One of them stepped forward. Young, early 30s. A face that might have been handsome if it wasn't locked into the specific blankness of a professional who'd been ordered to collect a package and deliver it intact. Mrs. Moretti? She almost corrected him. Almost said her name was Vale. But she didn't, because in this moment, standing on a beach in the Caribbean with the sounds of combat fading behind her and a crime lord's yacht waiting on the dark water ahead, the name Moretti was the only armor she had. Take me to Soren. The ride across the water took 12 minutes. Selena sat in the center of the inflatable with her hands gripping the rope handle along the side and her jaw clenched against the spray that hit her face every time the boat crested a wave. The two men sat fore and aft, silent, professional, watching her with the dispassionate attention of handlers managing a transfer. The yacht materialized from the darkness like a hallucination. Smaller than the Obsidian, maybe 150 feet, but immaculate. All white hull and warm lighting, with the name Meridian painted on the stern in gold script. It looked like a yacht from a magazine, a vacation vessel. The kind of thing a man who funded hospitals and sat on charitable boards would own. They boarded through a swim platform at the stern. A steward, because even men who sent mercenaries to storm private islands apparently maintained standards of hospitality, led her up a spiral staircase to the main deck salon. Nikolai Soren was exactly what she expected, and nothing like what she expected, simultaneously. Tall, taller than Damien, with silver blonde hair combed back from a broad forehead and eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and depthless. Mid-50s, maybe. The kind of face that photographed well, high cheekbones, clean jaw, a mouth that settled naturally into a pleasant, faintly amused expression. He wore linen trousers and a cream-colored shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to mid-forearm, and stood beside a table laid with breakfast, actual breakfast, eggs and fruit and coffee in a porcelain pot, as though she were arriving for a scheduled brunch. Selena. He extended his hand. She didn't take it. He withdrew it without offense. Please sit. You must be exhausted. Pull your people off the island. Already done. I made the call the moment you boarded the inflatable. Your guards are being left alone. First aid supplies have been left at the south entrance. I am not a gratuitously cruel man despite what this evening's events might suggest. You attacked an island and killed people. I deployed forces against a fortified position held by armed combatants in a dispute between myself and your husband. The violence was proportional to the resistance. Had Mr. Moretti staffed the island with a smaller security detail, fewer people would have been hurt. The calculus of escalation is, unfortunately, a shared responsibility. He said it the way you'd explain a math problem to a slow student, patient, clear, without a trace of guilt. And that, more than the violence or the phone call or the mercenaries on the beach, told Selena exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. Not cruel, worse, efficient. A man who'd incorporated human suffering into his cost-benefit analysis and moved on. She sat. Not because she wanted to, but because her legs were failing. The adrenaline that had carried her through the tunnel and down the cliff and across the water was metabolizing into something heavier, and if she didn't sit, she was going to fall. Soren poured coffee, set a cup in front of her, sat across the table with the easy posture of a man hosting a weekend guest. The Casablanca file, she said. His eyebrows rose slightly. You're direct. I appreciate that. Damien always did admire efficiency. I didn't come here for your appreciation. I came here because you gave me a choice between my life and other people's lives, and I chose other people. That's not courage. That's math. Now show me what you have." Soren studied her for a moment. The amusement in his expression deepened into something more complex, respect maybe, or the specific interest of a collector encountering an object he hadn't expected to find valuable. He reached beneath the table and produced a manila folder, thin, maybe 20 pages. Unmarked except for a single word handwritten on the tab in black ink, Casablanca. "Before you open this," he said, "I want you to understand something. What's in this file doesn't come from me. I didn't create it. I didn't commission it. I obtained it through channels that I won't disclose, but I have verified its authenticity through 3 independent sources. The documents are real, the photographs are real, and the conclusions they support are unambiguous." He slid the folder across the table. Selina looked at it. The manila paper was slightly worn at the edges, handled multiple times, passed between multiple hands. It sat on the white tablecloth like a wound. She opened it. The first page was a photograph, black and white, grainy, the kind of image pulled from old surveillance footage that had been enhanced but not enough. It showed a woman standing in a doorway. Young, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair, thin face. A posture Selina recognized because she saw it every time she looked in a mirror. The specific way a body holds itself when it's carrying more weight than it was built for. The woman looked like her, not similar, not reminiscent, like her. The same jawline, the same cheekbones, the same dark eyes with the same shadows beneath them. If Selina didn't know better, if she didn't know that the photograph was dated 27 years ago, 2 years before she was born, she would have sworn she was looking at herself. Who is this? Her name was Natalia Serova. She was a courier for a logistics network operating out of Eastern Europe in the late 1990s. Low level, expendable. One of dozens of young women used to move documents and small packages across borders that were, at the time, in various states of political collapse. Selina turned the page. More photographs. Natalia in different locations, a train station, a cafe, a narrow street that could have been anywhere in Europe. In every image, she carried the same expression. Wary, watchful, surviving. She was also Nikolai Soren Sr.'s lover for approximately 14 months, Soren continued. My father. She disappeared in 1999, presumed dead. The network she worked for was dismantled by an operation jointly coordinated between 2 competing organizations, one of which was led by a man named Enzo Moretti. Selina's head snapped up. Enzo Moretti. Damien's father, the terrible man from Naples. She looked back at the file, turned more pages, financial documents she couldn't read, wire transfers, shell company records, routing numbers, then a medical document, a hospital intake form from a clinic in Morocco. Casablanca, dated March 1999. The patient's name was Natalia Serova. The reason for admission was labor and delivery. The infant's name, listed in a nurse's handwriting at the bottom of the form, smudged but legible, was Selina. The room tilted, the yacht rocked beneath her, but the tilting wasn't from the water, it was from inside. The floor of her understanding, the bedrock she'd built her entire life on. Parents who loved her, a family that was hers, an origin story that was simple and true, cracking open to reveal something vast and dark underneath. That's not... Her voice came out strangled. Wrong, like someone else was speaking through her throat. My mother's name was Angela. Angela Vale. She raised me in Queens. Angela Vale adopted you at 4 months old through a closed adoption arranged by intermediaries connected to Enzo Moretti's organization. The adoption was sealed. The records were buried. Angela and Robert Vale were told nothing about the child's origins except that the birth mother had died and there was no surviving family. You're lying. The DNA analysis is on page 14. Obtained from a coffee cup you discarded at a cafe in Greenwich Village approximately 6 months ago. Compared against samples from Natalia Serova's medical records held in a Moroccan archive. The match probability is 99.7%. Selina turned to page 14. The laboratory report was clinical, sterile, printed on letterhead from a genetics firm she'd never heard of. The numbers blurred as her eyes filled with water she hadn't authorized, but she could see enough. The probability. The conclusion. The word match printed in bold at the bottom of the page like a verdict. Natalia didn't die, Soren said. His voice had changed, softer now, stripped of its earlier polish. Not gentle, she didn't think this man was capable of genuine gentleness, but aware at least that he was handling something fragile. She was killed, executed during the dismantling of the courier network, on the direct orders of Enzo Moretti. Your biological mother was murdered by your husband's father. The file fell from her hands, pages scattered across the table, across the white cloth, photographs and documents sliding over each other like leaves in a gutter. And Damien knows. Soren's voice was steady, relentless, the voice of a man pressing a blade into a wound he hadn't created but had no intention of helping heal. He's known since before he ever saw you at that charity gala. The file was in his father's archives, a record kept as insurance, the way men like Enzo Moretti kept records of everything they destroyed. Damien found it when he inherited the empire. He found the photograph of Natalia. He saw the resemblance. He had the DNA test conducted himself. The same cafe, the same cup. And when the results confirmed what he suspected, he didn't tell you. He didn't walk away. He didn't do the decent, human thing and let you live in the truth. What is that? Soren leaned forward. His pale eyes held hers with the clinical focus of a surgeon. He married you. He brought you into the family that murdered your mother. And he kept the truth locked in a file named after the city where you were born, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Because in Damien Moretti's world, even the woman he loves is ultimately an asset to be managed. Selina couldn't breathe. The air in the salon was thick, too warm, too sweet, contaminated with coffee and flowers and the clean scent of Soren's cologne, and it pressed against her lungs like a physical weight. Her hands were flat on the table, pressing down hard, as though the pressure against the wood was the only thing keeping her anchored to the present. Her mother, not Angela, Angela was her mother, would always be her mother, the woman who'd held her and fed her and read to her and died slowly in a hospital bed, while Selina held her hand and promised everything would be okay. But before Angela, before Queens, before the life she knew, there was another woman, a young woman in a photograph, a courier with dark hair and Selina's face, and a baby born in a clinic in Casablanca who was taken from her arms and routed through a network of intermediaries until she landed in a brownstone in Queens with people who loved her and never knew where she came from. And Damien knew. He knew. And he watched her through cameras and married her and brought her to an island and held her hand on a terrace under the stars and told her she was the reason he couldn't breathe. And he knew. The satellite phone on the table buzzed. Damien's number. She stared at it. He'll be calling because his security team reported the breach, Soren said. He'll be frantic. The version of Damien Moretti that you've been shown, the tortured man who can't control his feelings, will be in full effect. I'd suggest answering, if only to hear what he sounds like when the mask is real. She picked up the phone. Her hand was steady. The shaking had stopped, replaced by something colder, harder, a numbness that started in her chest and spread outward like frost on glass. Selina, Damien's voice, ragged, destroyed. She could hear engines in the background, wind, the sound of a boat at full speed. Where are you? Enzo said, I'm on Soren's yacht. Silence. Complete, airless silence, as though every sound on his end had been swallowed by a vacuum. I'm alive, she continued. Her voice came from somewhere outside herself, calm, flat, disconnected from the earthquake happening inside her body. Nobody's shooting anymore. I came voluntarily. I'm coming. I'm already on the water. 2 hours. The Casablanca file, Damien. The silence that followed was different from the first. The first was shock. This was recognition. The specific, devastating quiet of a man who hears the one sentence he's been dreading for months and understands, in the space between heartbeats, that everything he built is about to come apart. Selina, my mother, my real mother, you knew. Let me explain. You knew your father killed her. You knew I was her daughter. You knew before the gala, before the contract, before any of it. And you married me anyway. It's more complicated than, did you know? Yes or no? The engines roared. The wind screamed. And across the water, in a boat tearing south through the Caribbean at 40 knots, Damien Moretti closed his eyes and spoke the word that ended everything. Yes. Selina lowered the phone from her ear, set it on the table. looked at Nikolai Sorin, who sat across from her with his pale eyes and his pressed linen and his breakfast table and his patient, devastating patience. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want to offer you a choice, a real one, not the engineered choices Damien has been feeding you for 9 months. Not the rigged contract or the manufactured circumstances or the stage-managed revelations. A genuine, unmanipulated choice. Which is? Stay with me, temporarily. Let me show you the full scope of what Damien Moretti has built, and what he's built it on, and then decide for yourself whether the man who married you deserves the woman he took." She looked at the file, the scattered pages, Natalia Serova's face staring up from a grainy photograph with eyes that were her eyes, a jaw that was her jaw, a life that was stolen before Selena ever knew it existed. She looked at the phone, dark now, silent. Damien's voice still echoing in the air like smoke after a fire. She looked at the ocean through the salon windows. Dawn was breaking fully now, painting the water gold and copper and a shade of red that looked, from a certain angle, like blood. Then Selena Vale, the woman who'd married a stranger to save her family, who'd boarded a yacht in the middle of the night, who'd walked through a jungle and down a cliff and across open water to stop people from dying, made the decision that would define everything that came after. She didn't choose Damien. She didn't choose Soren. She stood up from the table, picked up the satellite phone, the file, and every scattered page, and walked toward the salon door. "Where are you going?" Soren asked. The amusement was gone from his voice. For the first time since she'd met him, he sounded uncertain. "Off this yacht. Off your island. Off his island. Off every piece of ground that belongs to a man who thinks he can buy me, or break me, or use my dead mother's memory as a chess piece in a war I never asked to fight. There's nowhere to go. We're in the middle of the ocean." She turned, looked at him with eyes that were dry and burning and absolutely, terrifyingly clear. "Then I'll swim." She pushed through the salon door, crossed the deck, and descended the stairs to the swim platform at the stern. The ocean spread before her, vast, dark, indifferent, stretching to a horizon that offered nothing but distance. Behind her, she heard Soren's voice calling out an order, heard footsteps on the deck, heard the commotion of men who'd been prepared for every scenario except a woman choosing the water over both sides of their war. And somewhere to the north, cutting through the morning light at 40 knots with every engine screaming and every second an eternity, Damien Moretti gripped the bow rail of a speedboat and stared at the coordinates on his phone and understood, with the perfect crystalline agony of a man watching the last good thing in his life slip through his fingers, that the secret he'd been carrying since the night he first saw her face had finally, irreversibly detonated. The water was warm. The sky was gold. And between two empires, standing at the edge of a swim platform with the Casablanca file clutched against her chest and the ruins of every lie she'd ever been told dissolving in the salt air around her, Selena Vale realized that the woman who walked into Belladonna Tower 3 weeks ago, the practical, careful, self-sacrificing woman who signed a contract and swallowed her fear and told herself it was enough to survive, that woman was gone, burned away, stripped clean, reduced to nothing but bone and breath and a fury so pure it didn't have a name yet. Whatever rose from the ashes would be something else entirely, something neither Damien Moretti nor Nikolai Sorin was prepared for. She didn't jump, not because she was afraid of the water. She'd grown up swimming in public pools in Queens where the chlorine burned your eyes and the lifeguards were 16 and half asleep. She didn't jump because the moment her toes curled over the edge of the swim platform and the warm Caribbean stretched beneath her like a promise with no floor, something harder than fear locked her legs in place. Rage. Not the hot, reactive kind that burns fast and leaves you hollow. This was structural, geological. The kind of anger that forms over years beneath the surface of a life built on lies and only needs one crack to erupt. Selena stood on the edge of Nikolai Sorin's yacht, with the Casablanca file pressed against her sternum, and felt it rise through her body like magma, up through her legs, her gut, her chest, into her throat where it sat like a coal she couldn't swallow or spit out. She turned around. Soren stood at the top of the stern stairs, flanked by 2 of his men. His expression had rearranged itself from surprise back to calculation. She could see the gears turning behind those pale eyes, the rapid reassessment of a man who'd expected her to crumble and was now recalibrating for something he hadn't modeled. You said you wanted to give me a choice, she said. I did. Then give me a boat. A real one, with fuel and a GPS and no escort. Give me that and I'll leave your yacht without making a scene, and you can go back to your war with Damien without using me as the bullet. Soren tilted his head, a gesture so controlled it looked rehearsed. And where would you go? That's my problem. It's also mine. If you return to Damien, the leverage I've spent considerable resources establishing disappears. If you disappear entirely, I lose a variable I may need later. Neither option serves my interests. I don't care about your interests. No, I can see that. He descended 2 steps. His men stayed at the top, a choreographed move designed to appear non-threatening, and Selina clocked it with the same instinct that used to tell her which blocks to avoid after dark. But consider this. Damien Moretti is approximately 90 minutes from this position and closing fast. He will arrive with armed men and the specific desperation of a man who has just lost the only thing he cares about. When he gets here, there will be a confrontation. People will be hurt, possibly killed. And you, standing between us on a swim platform in the middle of the ocean, will be the fulcrum on which that violence balances. So let me leave before he gets here. Or stay. And use the next 90 minutes to understand the full scope of what you're dealing with, so that when the moment of decision arrives, you're not choosing blind. She hated that he was right, hated it with every cell in her body. But the practical, survival-oriented part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through debt collectors and hospital bills, and 3 weeks inside Damien Moretti's silence, recognized the logic. She had 90 minutes. She had a file full of truths she hadn't finished reading, and she had questions that neither man had fully answered. 90 minutes, she said. Then I leave this yacht. On my terms. In a boat you provide. Or I tell Damien everything you showed me and everything you said, and the 2 of you can spend the rest of your lives wondering which parts I believed. Soren studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the warm, practiced smile from earlier, but something thinner, sharper. The smile of a man who'd just realized he was playing chess with someone who'd changed the rules without asking permission. You'd make an exceptional negotiator, Selina. I'm a nurse from Queens. We negotiate with insurance companies. You're not that different. She climbed the stairs past him, past his men, and walked back into the salon. Sat down at the table, opened the file. And for the next 40 minutes, she read. The file was more than Natalia Serova's story. It was an archaeology of intersecting criminal empires, a documented history of the network that had employed Selina's biological mother and the 2 organizations that had destroyed it. One led by Enzo Moretti, the other by Nikolai Soren Sr. They'd been partners once, allied against the courier network for territorial reasons that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with market share. The couriers were competition, so they were eliminated. Natalia was collateral damage. One name among dozens in an operational report that read like a grocery list of human lives terminated for business purposes. But unlike the others, Natalia had left something behind. A 4-month-old daughter who'd been extracted by a third party, an intermediary whose name was redacted in the file, but whose methods were meticulous. The baby was placed with a family in New York through a closed adoption that erased every trace of her origins. Until Damien found the file in his father's archives. The documents on pages 18 through 20 were the most devastating. Internal memos from Damien's organization, dated 14 months ago, detailing a private investigation he'd commissioned after discovering Natalia's photograph. The investigator had traced the adoption pathway, confirmed the child's placement with Angela and Robert Vale, and conducted the DNA comparison that appeared on page 14. The final memo, dated 3 weeks before the charity gala, where Damien first saw her, contained a single recommendation from the investigator. Subject confirmed as biological daughter of Natalia Serova. Recommend full disclosure and distance. Continued engagement carries extreme reputational and operational risk. Damien had written one word in the margin, in that sharp, angular handwriting she recognized from every note he'd ever left her. No. He'd known. He'd been advised to stay away. And he'd walked into that gala anyway, looked across the room, and let himself fall. Not by accident, not by impulse. By choice. The deliberate, informed choice of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, who knew that the woman he couldn't stop watching was the daughter of a woman his father had killed, and chose to pursue her anyway because the obsession was stronger than the guilt. Selena closed the file, set it on the table, pressed her palms against her eyes. She didn't cry. The tears were there. She could feel them, hot and ready, pressing against the backs of her eyes like water behind a dam. But she wouldn't give them to this room, not with Soren watching, not with his cameras recording, not on a yacht owned by a man who'd handed her this truth as a weapon and was waiting to see which direction she aimed it. "You said this changes everything," she said, dropping her hands. "You were right, but not the way you think." Soren raised an eyebrow. "You gave me this file because you want me to hate Damien. You want me to see him as the son of my mother's killer, as a man who married me under false pretenses, as a predator who couldn't resist the perverse symmetry of possessing the daughter of his father's victim. And some of that is true. Maybe all of it. But here's what you miscalculated." She stood up. The file stayed on the table. "You assumed the truth would break me, that I'd read this and crumble, that I'd become your weapon. A traumatized woman you could point at Damien like a loaded gun. But I've been broken before, Soren. I've been broken by things worse than a piece of paper. I watched my mother die. Not Natalia. Angela. The woman who actually raised me. I held her hand for 6 months while the disease ate her alive, and I went to work the next morning because the bills didn't stop when the heart monitor flatlined. I have been broken and rebuilt so many times there's nothing left that you can shatter." Kate. Soren's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted, a recalculation, rapid and invisible, like tumblers falling in a lock. "So what do you intend to do?" "I intend to get off this yacht. I intend to find Damien Moretti, and I intend to look him in the eye and make him answer for every lie he's told me. Not because you want me to, but because I deserve it. And when that conversation is over, I'll decide what happens next. Not you, not him, me." She picked up the satellite phone, checked the time. 52 minutes had passed since she'd sat down. "You owe me a boat," she said. Soren stood, straightened his cuffs. The casual elegance was back, the mask reapplied, the moment of genuine surprise sealed over with the practiced surface of a man who never stayed off balance for long. "I'll give you a boat," he said, "but I want you to understand something before you leave. Damien will come here regardless. Whether you're on this yacht or not, he will come. And when he does, the confrontation I described will happen. You can be present for it, and perhaps prevent the worst of it. Or you can be on the open water alone while 2 men with armies decide your future without your input. You're trying to keep me here. I'm trying to ensure you have agency in what comes next. There's a difference." "You keep saying that. There's a difference. Like the distinction matters when the result is the same." For the first time, something genuine crossed Soren's face. Not amusement, not calculation, something older, harder, almost like respect, if respect could be extracted from a man who'd built his life on the principle that other people were variables to be managed. "Your mother was like you," he said quietly. "Natalia. I was 13 when she disappeared, and I remember very little about her except that she argued with my father in a way no one else dared. She had the same quality you have, this refusal to be categorized. My father called it stubbornness. I think it's something else. Don't use my mother to manipulate me. I'm not. I'm telling you something true because you've earned it. And because in approximately 40 minutes, this situation is going to become very violent, and I'd rather you survived it." The words landed with a weight that settled in her bones. She looked at Soren, really looked at him, past the linen and the politeness and the breakfast table, and saw, beneath the polish, a man who was afraid. Not of Damien, not of the confrontation, of something larger, something that had been set in motion before either of them was born and was now hurtling toward a conclusion that no amount of strategy could fully control. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. "Many things, but the relevant one is this. The boats I sent to your island weren't just carrying soldiers. They were carrying evidence, hard drives, financial records, communications intercepts, enough material to dismantle Damien Moretti's empire from the inside out. My people planted that evidence in his compound while the fighting provided cover. When the authorities arrive, and they will arrive, because an anonymous tip was placed with the Coast Guard 40 minutes ago, they will find a private island fortified with military-grade weapons, staffed by armed combatants, and containing evidence of criminal enterprise sufficient to trigger a federal investigation. Selena's blood stopped moving. She felt it, the actual cessation of circulation, a fraction of a second where her heart forgot its rhythm and her body hung suspended between beats. You framed him. I positioned assets. Framing implies fabrication. The evidence is real, obtained from Damien's own operations over the past 7 years. I've simply relocated it to a venue where its discovery will have maximum impact. You're destroying him. I'm removing a competitor. The destruction is incidental. And you needed me off the island so I wouldn't be there when the authorities arrived. I needed you off the island so you wouldn't be arrested alongside him. You're welcome. The satellite phone buzzed. Damien's number again. She stared at it. Answer it, Soren said. Tell him what I've told you. About the planted evidence. About the Coast Guard. Give him the chance to run. It won't save his empire, but it might save his freedom. Consider it my gift to you, the ability to warn the man you love before the trap closes. You want me to warn him. I want him to know it was you who gave him the chance. Because when this is over, when the empire falls and the accounts are frozen and the allies scatter, the only thing Damien Moretti will have left is the memory of who tried to save him. And I want that memory to be poisoned by the knowledge that the woman who saved him did it with information obtained from the man who destroyed him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not violent cruelty, the kind she'd seen in emergency rooms and back alleys, but architectural. Engineered. A machine designed to inflict maximum psychological damage through the precise manipulation of love and loyalty and guilt. Selena picked up the phone, answered it. Damien. I'm 35 minutes out. His voice was raw, stripped. She could hear the engine screaming beneath him and the wind tearing at the satellite connection. Are you hurt? No. Is he there? Is he... Listen to me. Soren planted evidence on the island. Hard drives, financial records. He called the Coast Guard. They're coming. Silence. Then a sound she'd never heard from him before. A laugh. Short, bitter, expelled from his lungs like a bullet. Not amusement, recognition. The sound of a man watching the last structural support of his life give way and realizing with grim clarity that the collapse was inevitable. How long? I don't know. 40 minutes, maybe less. The compound. Did his people... Enzo. Is Enzo... I don't know. I haven't been able to reach him since I left. Another silence. Longer. She could hear him breathing, fast, shallow, the breathing of a man processing catastrophic information while hurtling across open water at speeds that turned the ocean into concrete. I'm still coming, he said. I know. Not for the island, not for the evidence, for you. Damien, everything in that file is true. Every word. I knew about Natalia. I knew about my father. I knew who you were before I ever saw your face, and I married you anyway because I'm exactly the kind of man that file says I am. Selfish, obsessive, incapable of letting go of something once I've decided it's mine. His voice cracked on the last word. She heard it, the fracture, the break in the carefully maintained structure of a man who'd spent his entire adult life ensuring that no one ever heard him sound vulnerable. It was real. She knew it was real because she'd spent 3 weeks learning the difference between Damien's masks and his moments, and this was not a mask. But I am coming for you, he continued. Not because you're an asset, not because you're leverage, because 35 minutes ago, when Enzo told me you walked off that island to save his life, something happened to me that I can't explain and can't reverse. Something broke. And the thing that broke was the last piece of machinery that let me pretend this was anything other than what it is. What is it? You know what it is. She closed her eyes, pressed the phone against her ear, felt the yacht rock beneath her and the morning sun warm on her face through the salon windows and the weight of 26 years of a life she now knew was built on a foundation of blood and buried paperwork. 35 minutes, she said. 35 minutes. She hung up, set the phone down, looked at Soren. He's coming. I expected nothing less. What happens when he gets here? Soren stood, buttoned his cuff, walked to the salon window and looked out at the ocean where, somewhere beyond the curve of the horizon, a speedboat carrying Damien Moretti was tearing south with the specific velocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. That, Soren said, depends entirely on you. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Selena's life. She spent them on the upper deck of the Meridian, sitting in a teak chair with the Casablanca file in her lap and the satellite phone on the armrest, and the morning sun climbing higher over a Caribbean that looked, from this angle, impossibly peaceful. Blue water, white clouds, the faint silhouette of islands on the northern horizon like dark teeth in a bright mouth. Below her, Soren's crew prepared. She watched them through the gaps in the deck railing, men moving with practiced efficiency, checking equipment, adjusting positions. Not fortifying, not arming for battle, arranging, like stagehands preparing a set. Soren was orchestrating this confrontation the way he orchestrated everything, as a performance, a controlled demonstration of power designed to achieve a specific outcome. She thought about her mother, both of them. Angela, who'd braided her hair before school and packed lunches with notes that said, "You're my brave girl," and held her through nightmares and never, not once, not in 22 years of motherhood, gave any indication that Selena wasn't biologically hers. Angela, who'd kept the secret so completely that it had died with her, buried in a cemetery in Queens alongside the woman who'd carried it. And Natalia, a name in a file, a face in a photograph, a young woman who'd carried packages across collapsing borders and carried a baby in a clinic in Casablanca and been killed by a man named Enzo Moretti while her daughter slept in a stranger's arms 4,000 miles away. Two mothers, both gone, both silenced by different kinds of violence, one by disease, the other by a bullet or a blade or whatever method a man like Enzo Moretti preferred. And between them, connecting them across decades and oceans and the impenetrable machinery of criminal enterprise, was Selena, the living seam, the place where two worlds of loss intersected and produced a woman who didn't know who she was anymore. She looked at the file, at Natalia's photograph, at her own face reflected back from a past she'd never been allowed to know. "I see you," she whispered to the photograph. "I see you, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to survive this. For both of us." At 7:14 a.m., the horizon broke, a dark shape, small at first, barely distinguishable from the glint of sun on water, then larger, faster, growing with the specific urgency of an object driven by something more powerful than its engine. Damien. Selena stood, gripped the railing, watched the boat grow from a speck to a shape to a recognizable vessel. A military-grade speedboat, matte black, cutting the water at a speed that threw twin rooster tails of spray 20 feet into the air. She could see figures on board. 4, 5, armed, and at the bow, standing with one hand on the windscreen and the other gripping something she couldn't identify, a figure she recognized by posture alone, the specific way Damien Moretti held his body when he'd abandoned every strategy except the most primitive one. Get to her, whatever it takes. Soren appeared beside her on the upper deck. He'd changed, suit jacket now, as though dressing for a meeting, and his expression had settled into something flat and final. "I'm going to ask you one more time to consider staying behind me when this begins," he said. "No. He'll be irrational, possibly violent. Men in his state, I've handled men in worse states in the ER at 3 in the morning. Don't tell me about irrational. This isn't an emergency room. No, it's worse. Because in the ER, at least the people trying to hurt each other don't pretend they're doing it for love." The speedboat reached the Meridian's perimeter, 300 yards, 200. Selena could see Damien's face now. Not the details, not from this distance, but the shape of it. The tension. The way his entire body was angled forward, straining against physics and time, and the vast indifference of the ocean between him and the woman standing at the railing of his enemy's yacht. Soren's men took positions along the starboard rail. 6 of them. Armed, but weapons lowered. A show of force calibrated to communicate readiness without provoking immediate violence. The choreography of men who'd done this before. The speedboat cut its engines 50 yards from the Meridian. Momentum carried it forward, the hull settling into the water with a hiss of deceleration. 2 of Damien's men threw lines. Soren's men caught them. The boats were lashed together with the mechanical efficiency of parties who understood the protocol of controlled confrontation. And then Damien stepped from the speedboat onto the Meridian swim platform. He looked destroyed, not in the dramatic, cinematic way that destruction is usually portrayed, No torn clothing, no blood on his face, no outward signs of battle. His destruction was internal, and it radiated from him like heat from a reactor breach. His eyes were raw, red-rimmed, dark-circled, the eyes of a man who hadn't slept and had spent the last 2 hours staring into the specific abyss of losing everything that mattered. His hair was matted with salt spray. His shirt was soaked. His hands, those careful, controlled hands that she'd watched grip glasses and door frames and railings with such deliberate restraint, hung at his sides, open and trembling. He looked up, saw her at the upper deck railing. The sound he made was not a word. It was a sound from before words, a raw, involuntary exhalation that came from somewhere below his diaphragm and carried every emotion he'd spent 3 weeks and 20 years and his entire carefully constructed life trying to suppress. Relief, terror, grief. Love so acute it looked like physical pain. Selena. She didn't answer. She descended the upper deck stairs to the main level, walked through the salon where the Casablanca file still sat on the table, crossed the aft deck where Soren's men stood at attention, descended the stern stairs to the swim platform where Damien stood, dripping, shaking, looking at her like she was the last light in a world going dark. They stood 3 feet apart. The ocean lapped against the platform. The boats rocked gently in the morning swell. Behind her, Soren watched from the main deck. Behind him, armed men on both sides calculated angles and distances and the probability of violence. "You came," she said. "I will always come." "That's not enough anymore." "I know." She held up the file. He looked at it. His face didn't change. It was already at maximum devastation, with nowhere left to fall. "Tell me," she said. "Not what's in the file, not the facts. Tell me why. Look at me, and tell me why you married the daughter of the woman your father murdered and kept it secret. And if you lie to me, if I see the mask go up for even 1 second, I will hand this file to every journalist on the eastern seaboard and let your empire burn." The wind shifted. Salt spray misted across the platform. Behind them, Damien's men tensed on the speedboat, and Soren's men tensed on the yacht, and the distance between peace and violence compressed to the width of a wrong word. Damien spoke. "My father kept records of everything, every deal, every betrayal, every person he hurt. He kept them the way hunters keep trophies, organized, cataloged, stored in a vault in a house in Naples that I inherited when he died. I was 17. I spent a year reading those files, learning what he was, learning what he'd built, and learning page by page to hate him with a precision that I've never been able to direct at anyone else." His voice was steady, barely, the steadiness of a man who'd rehearsed this speech in his head 1,000 times, and was now delivering it for the first and only time. Natalia's file was one of hundreds. One name, one photograph, one operational summary that described her elimination in the same language used to describe a shipment rerouted or a warehouse decommissioned. She was nothing to him, a line item. And for 16 years she was nothing to me either, just another ghost in my father's archive. Then you found the adoption pathway, 14 months ago. A junior associate was digitizing the old records and flagged an anomaly. A child extraction protocol attached to Natalia's file that didn't match any of the standard operational templates. I pulled the thread. The thread led to Morocco. Morocco led to a closed adoption in New York. The adoption led to a woman named Angela Vale and her husband Robert, and their daughter. He stopped. His jaw worked. She could see the muscle jumping, that familiar tick that tells she'd cataloged so carefully, that involuntary marker of something happening beneath the surface that he couldn't control. I should have stopped there. The investigator told me to stop. Distance and disclosure, that was the recommendation. Walk away. Send an anonymous letter. Let her know who she is and where she came from, and let her decide what to do with the information. That's what a decent man would have done. But you're not a decent man. No, I'm not. I'm my father's son. And when I saw your photograph for the first time, not the surveillance photos, the first one, the one pulled from the adoption agency's archive, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. You looked like her, like Natalia, the same face, the same eyes. And I felt something I'd never felt in my life. Not guilt. I'd felt guilt before. Guilt is manageable. This was recognition. like looking at a wound my father had made and seeing, for the first time, the human being underneath the damage. So you watched me. I watched you for months. I watched you work and struggle and sacrifice and refuse to break. And every day I watched, the distance between doing the right thing and doing what I wanted grew smaller, until there was no distance at all. Until the right thing and the wrong thing merged into a single, unbearable impulse that I couldn't distinguish from love? The word hung between them like a blade suspended mid-fall. Damien closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. I don't know if I'm capable of love. I know I'm capable of obsession, of need, of the kind of fixation that turns a person into an axis around which your entire world rotates, whether that's love or something darker, something inherited, something broken, something my father passed down like a genetic defect. I can't tell you. I don't have the equipment to tell the difference. That's not good enough. It's all I have. Then it's not enough. She turned, started up the stairs, and behind her Damien's voice came raw and shattered. I was going to tell you, on the island, when I came back from Antigua. That was the last secret, the one that changes everything. I was going to give you the file and tell you everything and let you decide. I was going to give you the choice. She stopped. One foot on the stair, one on the platform, half turned. The morning sun caught the side of her face and turned the tears she'd finally released, two, just two, tracking down her cheek like slow fire, into liquid gold. The choice to what? To leave me. To take your family and disappear. To live the rest of your life knowing the truth and deciding for yourself what it means. I was going to give you that. I swear I was. But you didn't get the chance. No, because Soren moved first. Because I was too slow. Because I spent 3 weeks hiding behind locked doors and notes and cameras instead of standing in front of you and saying what I should have said the night you moved in. Which is what? He climbed the first stair, then the second. She didn't move. He stopped one step below her, close enough to touch, close enough that she could see the salt crystals drying on his eyelashes and the stubble on his jaw and the devastation in his eyes that no amount of money or power or strategic brilliance could disguise. I am the worst thing that ever happened to you, he said. My family destroyed yours. My obsession put you in danger. My silence almost got you killed. And I love you so completely that the thought of existing in a world where you don't forgive me is worse than anything Nikolai Soren could ever do to me. From the main deck above them, Soren's voice cut the morning air like a wire. How touching. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. They both looked up. Soren stood at the railing, phone in hand, his expression carrying the careful neutrality of a man delivering news he'd already profited from. The Coast Guard cutter is 18 minutes from your island, Damien. When they arrive, they'll find enough evidence to trigger an investigation that will freeze every account, seize every asset, and dismantle every structure you've spent 20 years building. Your men on the island are already being instructed to evacuate. Enzo, I'm told, is refusing to leave. Loyalty is a beautiful thing, but it won't help him in a federal courtroom. Damien turned from Selena to Soren. The transition was instantaneous. A full-body reconfiguration from devastated lover to something predatory and cold. She watched it happen. The jaw tightening, the shoulders squaring, the eyes emptying of everything soft and filling with a calculation so rapid she could almost hear it clicking behind his pupils. What do you want, Nikolai? What I've always wanted. The Atlantic corridor, your shipping routes, your port access, your distribution infrastructure. Sign it over. All of it. Every contract, every holding, and I'll make a call. The evidence disappears. The Coast Guard finds nothing. Your empire survives. Diminished but intact. You keep your freedom. You keep your wife. You lose the territory. And if I don't, then in 17 minutes, everything ends. For you, for Enzo, for every associate whose name appears in the files my people so thoughtfully deposited in your compound. The only thing you keep is her, if she'll still have you. The yacht rocked. The speedboat rocked. The ocean moved beneath them all with the indifferent rhythm of something that had existed long before human beings invented empires, and would exist long after those empires turned to ash. Damien looked at Selena. She looked at him. And in that look, compressed, electric, carrying the weight of every conversation they'd had, and every silence they'd endured, and every truth that had been revealed in the past 12 hours. Something passed between them that didn't require words. She saw him make the decision, saw it in his body before he spoke it, the release of tension in his shoulders, the softening of his jaw, the way his hands uncurled from fists into something open. Not surrender, not defeat. Something else. Something she'd never seen in him before. Letting go. "Make the call," Damien said. Soren blinked. The only sign of surprise he allowed himself. "You accept?" "The Atlantic corridor, the shipping routes, all of it. Draw up the transfer and I'll sign it on this deck." "Damien!" One of his men on the speedboat started forward. "Stand down!" Damien didn't look away from Soren. "Every contract, every holding, it's yours. In exchange, the evidence disappears, my people walk free, and Selena leaves this yacht with me. Right now." Soren held his gaze for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then he raised the phone to his ear and spoke 2 words in a language Selena didn't recognize. Somewhere, a call was made. Somewhere, evidence was being erased or relocated or whatever happened to weapons that had served their purpose. Somewhere, the machinery of Damien Moretti's empire, the ports, the routes, the ships, the infrastructure he'd built and maintained and fought for across 2 decades, was being signed away to the man who'd orchestrated its destruction. And on the swim platform of a yacht called Meridian, the most feared man in the underworld had just traded his kingdom for a woman standing 1 step above him with tears on her face and a dead mother's file in her hands. Papers were produced. Signatures were exchanged. The process took 11 minutes. 11 minutes during which Selena stood at the stern railing and watched the horizon and felt the world she'd entered 3 weeks ago reshape itself around her like a building being demolished and rebuilt simultaneously. Damien signed the last page, set the pen down, looked at Soren with an expression that was perfectly calm and perfectly lethal, the expression of a man who had just lost everything and was already, somewhere behind those dark eyes, calculating how to get it back. "We're done," he said. "For now," Soren replied. Damien extended his hand to Selena. She looked at it, the open palm, the long fingers, the tremor he couldn't hide. She didn't take it. Instead, she walked past him, down to the swim platform, and stepped onto the speedboat herself. Sat down on the center bench, looked straight ahead. Damien followed, stepped aboard. His men untied the lines. The engine roared to life. As the speedboat pulled away from the Meridian, Selena looked back once. Soren stood at the stern railing, watching them go. He raised a hand, not a wave, not a farewell, but something more ambiguous. An acknowledgement, a promise, a reminder that debts existed between them that had not yet been settled. She turned forward. The wind hit her face. The salt stung her eyes. And beside her, close enough to touch but separated by a distance no physical proximity could bridge, Damien Moretti stared at the horizon with the hollow gaze of a man who'd bought his wife's freedom with his empire and wasn't sure yet whether the trade would save them or finish what Soren had started. Selena gripped the bench, felt the speedboat accelerate beneath her, watched the Meridian shrink to a white speck on the water behind them. And between them, between the man who'd given up everything and the woman who hadn't decided yet what anything was worth, the Casablanca file sat on the bench, its pages riffling in the wind, Natalia Sarova's photograph catching the light, and then releasing it, and then catching it again. Like a heartbeat, like a ghost reaching across 27 years of silence to touch the daughter she never got to hold. The speedboat pointed north. The ocean opened ahead of them, and the war wasn't over. The speedboat ran north for 40 minutes before Damien's pilot cut the engine and let the hull settle into a drift. They were somewhere between Soren's position and the island. Open water, no land visible in any direction, just the flat blue plain of the Caribbean stretching to every horizon like the surface of a world that had been emptied of everything except light and salt, and the 2 people sitting 3 feet apart on a fiberglass bench with nothing left between them but truth. Selena hadn't spoken since they left the Meridian. Neither had Damien. His men, 4 of them, positioned at the bow and stern, with the rigid discipline of professionals who knew when to be invisible, stared at the water and pretended not to exist. The silence was different from every silence that had come before. The penthouse silence had been cold and architectural. The yacht silence had been liquid and loaded. The island silence had been fragile, tentative, 2 people circling the edge of something they weren't ready to name. This silence was aftermath. The silence of a landscape after the fire has passed through and left nothing standing. No walls, No masks, no carefully maintained distance, just scorched earth and two people sitting in the middle of it, breathing smoke. Selena broke it. "Take me to the island." Damien looked at her. His eyes were hollow, not empty, but hollowed, like a building that had been gutted by fire and still held its shape, but had nothing inside. "The Coast Guard." Mim Nkias. "You heard Soren. He made the call. The evidence is gone." "You trust that?" "I don't trust anything, but I trust math. Soren got what he wanted, the corridor, the roads, your infrastructure. Keeping the planted evidence serves no additional purpose. It's a spent weapon. He's too efficient to waste resources maintaining a threat that's already achieved its objective." Damien stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or the specific pain of watching someone you love demonstrate a capacity you never knew they had. "You sound like me," he said. Don't compare us. I'm not like you. I'm like me. And right now, the version of me that exists wants to go to that island, make sure Enzo is alive, make sure DeLuca hasn't slithered into the jungle, and sit in a room where I can think without the ocean trying to swallow me." He gave the order. The engine roared. The boat turned toward Carnelian. They reached the island at 8:47 a.m. The compound looked like a body after surgery, functional, intact, but bearing the visible scars of trauma. Bullet holes pockmarked the south wall. Two windows on the ground floor were shattered, their frames hanging like broken jaws. The pool deck was littered with shell casings that glinted in the morning sun like scattered coins. A medical tent had been erected near the main entrance where two of Damien's men, field medics, she realized were treating the wounded. Selena counted. 9 guards were on their feet, 5 were in the medical tent. 7 were unaccounted for. She did the math without wanting to and felt the number settle in her stomach like a stone. Enzo met them at the causeway. He was standing, barely. His left arm was in a field sling, blood soaking through the gauze wrapped around his bicep. A cut above his right eye had been butterfly-stitched shut, but was still seeping. His face was gray beneath the tan, and his eyes had the flat, unfocused quality of a man running on adrenaline fumes and willpower. He looked at Damien, then at Selena, then back at Damien. "I tried to stop her," he said. "I know. She made the call. Walked out through the maintenance tunnel. I couldn't—" His voice cracked, a hairline fracture in the stone facade. "I had 7 people left and they were inside the compound and she—" "I know, Enzo." Damien put his hand on the older man's uninjured shoulder. The gesture was brief, but carried a weight that went beyond the moment. 15 years of shared history, shared violence, shared silence, compressed into 5 seconds of contact. "How many did we lose?" 2 confirmed. Reeves and Katerina. 5 more with serious injuries. The rest are mobile. 2 dead. 2 people who'd been alive yesterday, who'd eaten meals and checked their phones and walked the perimeter in the tropical heat because a man they worked for told them this island was safe, were now bodies somewhere in the compound, covered by sheets or tarps, or whatever material was available when the fighting stopped and the accounting began. Selena's throat tightened. She didn't know them, had never spoken to them, but they'd been here because of her, because Damien Moretti loved her and Nikolai Soren knew it, and that calculus was a weight she would carry for the rest of her life. "Where's DeLuca?" she asked. Enzo's expression hardened. "Locked in the same room. My people kept him secured during the attack. He's been screaming for an hour, wants to talk to Damien." "He can wait," Damien said. "No," Selena said. "He can't." Both men looked at her. Damien with caution. Enzo with the particular wariness of a man who'd already learned what happened when Selena Vale made a decision. "DeLuca brokered this entire arrangement," she said. "He was the intermediary. He knew about the marriage, the contract, the financial structure. He was Soren's source for 4 months. But there's something that doesn't add up. Soren said the text about the Casablanca file didn't come from him. Someone else sent it. Someone who knew I was on this island, knew the satellite phone number, and wanted me to know about the file before Soren made his move." She looked at Damien. "How many people knew about the Casablanca file?" His jaw tightened. 3. Me. My investigator, who's dead. Car accident 8 months ago, which I now suspect wasn't an accident. And DeLuca. The name sat between them like a lit fuse. "DeLuca handled the adoption research," Damien said slowly. He was the one who traced the pathway from Natalia to the clinic in Casablanca to the intermediary network that placed you with the Veils. He compiled the initial file before I had the DNA analysis run. He knew everything. And he's been talking to Soren for 4 months. But Soren said the text wasn't from him, which means DeLuca wasn't just feeding information to Soren. He was playing his own game. Sending me that text was a move designed to destabilize both sides, make me question you, make Soren's revelation less controlled, inject chaos into a situation where both of you were trying to manage the outcome. The silence that followed was thick with recalculation. She watched Damien process it. The rapid, visible computation of a man reassessing every interaction, every piece of information, every assumption he'd made about the man who'd been his intermediary for years. He wasn't just a traitor, Damien said. He was positioning himself. For what? For survival. If Soren wins, DeLuca is the man who fed him intelligence for 4 months, a valued asset, protected, rewarded. If I win, DeLuca is the man who sent you the text that warned you about the file, the person who tried to give you the truth before anyone else could weaponize it. Either way, he survives. Either way, he has a claim on someone's gratitude. Then let's go remove his options. They found DeLuca in the windowless room on the ground floor, sitting in the same chair he'd occupied during his first interrogation. He'd deteriorated further, 2 days of confinement, an attack that shook the compound around him, and the knowledge that every faction in this war had reasons to want him either useful or dead had stripped away whatever was left of the polished dealmaker who'd sat across from Selena in a law office 3 weeks ago. He looked up when they entered. His eyes went to Selena first, then Damien, then back to Selena, lingering, searching for something, a flicker of sympathy maybe, or the specific softness of a woman who might advocate for mercy. He didn't find it. "You sent me the text," Selena said. DeLuca's tongue ran across his cracked lips. "I was trying to help. You were trying to survive. There's a difference, though I'm told the distinction doesn't offer much comfort." She saw Soren's phrase land on DeLuca's face and watched him recognize it, the verbal signature of the man he'd been secretly serving. His eyes widened. His hands, already trembling, began to shake visibly. "Here's what's going to happen," Selena said. She pulled a chair from the wall, sat down across from him, and leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. Damien stood behind her. Enzo stood by the door. The room felt very small. "You're going to tell me everything. Not the version you told Damien yesterday, the edited version, the one designed to make you look like a victim of blackmail. The real version. Starting with the night Soren's people first contacted you and ending with the moment you sent me that text about the Casablanca file. Every detail, every conversation, every piece of information you traded, and every favor you received in return." "And then what?" "And then we decide what happens to you. Together." She gestured between herself and Damien. "Not him alone, not me alone. Together. Because you didn't just betray Damien's operation, Marco. You sold my family's safety, my father's hospital, my sister's school, my life, to a man who used it to wage a war that killed 2 people on this island. So you owe me this story, and you're going to give it to me, starting now." DeLuca talked for 90 minutes. The real version was uglier than the first.